My name is Carlene Bechen, and I am a member of the small but mighty Oregon Area Progressives. We're a grassroots group in southern Dane County. After the November elections, we were really frustrated and upset, and just looked at ourselves and said, we got to do something to get more people on the ground doing the work to end gerrymandering. We knew that there was a lot going on at the policy level, at the legal level, but we didn't see a whole lot happening on the ground among concerned Wisconsinites. So that's when we decided to have a summit. We talked to a few folks from various pro-democracy nonprofit groups, and some of them were very enthusiastic, and I won't say who tried to pour water on a parade, but we decided we'd do it anyway, and here we are today. We're holding the summit here in Marshfield because it's the center of the state. It's about 2.5 to 3 hours from the furthest parts of the state, so we made it as accessible as we could. And it's a place that's gerrymandered, as is Wood County. Back in 2011 that happened, so we thought what better place and what better example, which actually happened accidentally, to have happen. So I'd like to start out by recognizing the planning committee for this event. We've met almost every Wednesday evening after work since February. So that group is Charles Uphoff, who's still checking for Tim, I think. Nancy Murphy, who's also still checking for Tim. Amanda Peterson, who was the person with the computer at the registration desk. Ron Denzel. Beth Whittemore. That was actually the person who said, we need to have a conference or something. And me. And also, a big thank you to all the OAP volunteers, the folks you see walking around in these t-shirts, because they have been our support. We actually meet as a group every Saturday morning. We're here today, but normally we'd be in the back room of the Firefly meeting. They gave us support, suggestions, time, and money to put this on. So if you see any of those folks, tell them thank you. So this summit is our baby. We're really happy that you're here, and we're glad to see so many other concerned Wisconsinites. All right, we'd also like to thank our co-sponsors. These are folks who are tabling, they're presenting, they've given us lots of advice and encouragement. League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Farmers Union, Our Wisconsin Revolution, the Madison Institute, Indivisible Madison and the TAR Group, the Wisconsin United to Amend, the Fair Elections Project, and the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. Okay, so that's it for housekeeping. Now we want to get just a bit into the reason why we're here today. This is our theory of change for why we're doing this work. And you'll get this, you don't have to memorize this, no quizzes. You'll get a piece of paper later on in the day that has this on it. So the theory of change is this. If we publicly elevate the specific demands to ban gerrymandering and draw maps fairly after the next census, very key, to our legislators and in the media, then the results will be that the state Supreme Court will approve fairer maps in 2021, meaning more competitive seats, less partisan manipulation of our districts, that respect local communities of interest, such as school districts, municipalities like Marshfield, and communities of color, and other things. Because the political, legal, and public pressure is too high not to. And I think Josh will talk a little bit about how public pressure can work. That's what we're basing our work on. This is our first phase of the work. I'm not going to go into great detail on this. Again, you'll get more about this later. But the phase runs between now and April of 2020, when the Supreme Court elections are two big goals. Getting more legislators to sign on to the bill and getting a 4-3 on the state Supreme Court, meaning getting another justice onto the state Supreme Court who believes, like we do, that gerrymandering corrupts our democracy. So there's some steps to that goal, some sample tactics, and you'll learn more about those later. Josh is the founder and director of RepresentUs, a post-partisan nonprofit organization that is advancing campaign finance and election reforms across the nation. RepresentUs sponsors an annual Unrigged Summit, which 3 of the OAP members attended last March in Nashville. RepresentUs has built one of the largest grassroots and social media communities in the democracy reform field, with a focus on how to leverage systemic change through mass movements that cross political ideologies. So please welcome Josh Silver.
Thanks, folks. Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I noticed if you're in the South and you say good morning to a crowd, it's an incredible cacophony of good mornings. And the farther north you go, the more sort of like it murmur. And by the time you get to Canada, they don't say anything. They just nod their heads and wonder why you're not living in Canada. So I'm Josh Silver, and I want to start by asking somebody to turn down the lights in the back, if you would. This presentation is less about me, more about the slides. Everybody now has, thanks to these things, we all have ADD. I don't know if anybody knew that, but we all can't pay attention to anything for more than about 30 seconds, or maybe I should just speak for myself. What I'm going to do today, I'm going to present you, I'm going to make 3 points, which is actually a lie. Things come in threes and people get it more, so I thought I would say 3 points, but it's really not true. I am going to show you 3 lines, and I'm going to show you 4 Macaulay Culkins. Okay, are you guys ready? Okay, now you guys are all here in this room because you are do-gooders. I can tell you with reasonable certainty that some of these issues and others prompted you at some point to say, you know, God, I care so much about these or one of these or some other issue, and I just keep running into these roadblocks. And what I want you to do is I want you to close your eyes for about just a few seconds, and I want you to think about what are the issues facing your family, your town, your state, your country, the world that you are most passionate about. So just give us a few seconds. Okay, so the reality is, and the reason we're here, is that politics, or the completely messed up state of politics, is blocking or significantly hindering progress on the issues that you care most about. It is terrifying. Now, you also probably saw for decades, some are blaming the Republicans, some are blaming the Democrats. Fast forward to 2019, many people blame him, many people blame her in this country, but yet what you see is that these are actually superficial analyses that are not actually the root of the problem. The root of the problem is the system failure. Now, we are going to talk all day about how to win redistricting reform and other democracy reforms. We're going to get really into the details, but I just want to back us out for as we start today, to remind us about why we are actually doing this. We're actually doing this work because several other nations recently created travel warnings to their citizens to the United States because of so many mass shootings, much like you would see if you were going to Afghanistan or another war-torn country. Child poverty is amongst the worst in the developed world. 43% of American families cannot afford basics like rent and food. We have one of the worst ranked healthcare systems in the developed world. We have a prison population that dwarfs that of other nations, including China and Russia per capita. Climate change has completely run away and looks like there's no turning back and government is doing nothing. The US was recently knocked out of the top 20 least corrupt countries in the world for the first time since the 21st century. And of course, in 2017, The Economist magazine, which looks at all the world's democracies and evaluates them, downgraded us from a so-called full democracy to a partial democracy. This is because of the system failures. This is the connecting of the dots about what's broken has brought you to this room in Marshfield, Wisconsin, which before last night I did not know existed. You were taken by these incredible maps, these hideous, manipulative little creatures that have rendered 86% of the US Congress uncompetitive. But it's interesting. It's not just the fact that it's the competition problem, it's the fact that I can't spell extremism. That's the real problem here today. I'm going to stop here for 1 second because we've just been doing a lot of testing on the internet and social media about what words are resonating the most with the American people, right, left, and center. And political extremism is off the charts. It's the most shared type of idea that we're seeing in terms of virality. So just make a note, when you talk about competition, as it relates to gerrymandering, it often is kind of sleepy. But if you talk about the truth, that when you gerrymander districts, when only 14% of the US House is competitive, when you then take all the competition out of the general election and place it in the primary election, where a small percentage of extreme partisan voters turn out, you are incentivizing politicians to be extreme. So if 90% of the country wants basic background checks on guns, you can blame gerrymandering as much as anything because politicians are required to appeal to the extreme base that won't entertain common sense policies. And then, of course, we're here as well, even if we're not working on it directly, because this has become the status quo for American politics. Lobbyists write our laws. Politicians in Washington are spending between 30 and 70% of their time fundraising. As Lawrence Lessig from Harvard says, the dependence corruption has most politicians dependent on the 0.05% of donors who give $10,000 or more to politics. And of course, we have a two-party duopoly where it's impossible to run without being a spoiler, even though we're seeing voter registration trends that look like this. Pretty remarkable. We've been flirting over 40% now for the past 4 years. Today we have 38% of American voters are independent, 31% of Democrat, 29% are Republican, and the majority of voters in each major party are not happy with their party. Then every election we see this absurd fight over the swing voter. Meanwhile, we've got the Gillens-Martins page from Princeton that you've probably heard about from one of our videos or elsewhere that looked at 20 years of congressional action and inaction versus at the same time the public polling on what the people want or didn't want, and found that the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact upon public policy. Think about that. We have a system that fosters extremism, spelled correctly. It actually blocks competition and integrity. It's a corrupt system in which we, the people, have a near zero impact upon public policy. And when the American people ask for help, we have near zero impact. It is not a good look. Yes, that is Macaulay culture. And Americans will say, yeah, that makes sense. Voters should pick politicians. Politicians should not select voters. But the problem is of course, we are asking the fox to put a lock on the hen house. When we're going to be talking later today about how we're going to lobby our counties, our cities, the state legislature, there is no issue more so with this dynamic than democracy. So in this context, we have to go around the US Congress and pass these laws all across America like you are doing, because that is what history shows works. That gets us to our second line. The first line was the line that your issue that you care about most was sitting on in that first slide. This one from a Bloomberg study, you may have seen it in some of our videos, that looked at the history of major change that had originally faced insurmountable obstacles in Washington and eventually won. This was women's right to vote, which from 1890 to 1920, the horizontal line is the number of years, the vertical line is the number of states. You can see how, and I'll just do it again for those of you who haven't seen this. You can see how it started in Wyoming, then Colorado, Utah, Idaho, then not a lot of action for about more than 10 years, and then more states pass it. You get to this blue line. Next one's 180 years, interracial marriage, 1787. A bunch of states get it, about 6. Then they go many years without it. In fact, it looks like about 60 years with no progress. And then more states legalize interracial marriage, and then you get to a blue line. And then a short arc for marriage equality from 2004 to 2016. My state, Massachusetts, starts, more states come on board. Eventually, you get to a key event, often a court decision or a grassroots campaign reaching maturity that triggers a rush of state activity that ultimately leads to a change in federal law. That is what we're doing with gerrymandering, because you guys recognize, whether it's explicitly or just subconsciously, you have figured out that there is this Venn diagram of policy impact and political viability. Will the policy actually change things? And can we actually win? And for too long, do-gooders like us, we tend to spend too much time outside of the middle of that diagram. And I'm not going to get into which ones, but I can say, for example, if you say that if we just make political money transparent so that everybody knows who's giving, who's bribing who, we could solve this problem. Not so much. So it's a valid policy that needs to happen, but it in itself is not going to be a complete game changer, but it should be part of something in addition to it. And there's a long list where too often you're seeing these efforts happen outside of the middle of this. But here's an important thing. This is important point number 1. And I know you know this, but I'm going to underscore it. Ending gerrymandering, fixing open primaries, passing ranked choice voting along with automatic voter registration and vote at home policies, and campaign finance and ethics laws. We are all part of the same ecosystem, and all of these policies, in my humble view, sit within that Venn diagram in America in 2019. That doesn't mean they all sit in the Venn diagram in Wisconsin. It doesn't mean that they all sit in the Venn diagram in your county or city. But what we are seeing trending across the country is that they do all find their way into the middle of the diagram. They go together. They are symbiotic. And as we saw together in 2018, we saw more victories across the country in America than any time in any one year in U.S. history. Can I give it up? Give it up. And you guys will probably know that when I present those slides, which I do all the time, all around the country, people always are like, what are all those yellow things, cities in Wisconsin? I'm like, those people are badass. They just like keep organizing and passing these things everywhere. And so another thing people don't realize, and I'm going to keep moving because I want to try to keep us on schedule, just in 2019, so we all know there was lots of victories. I mean, we saw 5 anti-gerrymandering laws passed at the ballot, and we'll talk about that in a minute, in 2018. But even just 2019, we've seen automatic voter registration pass in Maine. We've expanded ranked choice voting to presidential elections in that state. Hawaii passed full vote at home. New Mexico passed same-day voter registration and automatic voter registration. North Carolina had progress in their court case. Utah, every county has now opted to vote at home. North Dakota implemented their sweeping ethics reform that was passed in 2018. New Jersey passed a very strong dark money bill. So this is happening all across the country, and it's a story most people don't know about. This week, New York City passed ranked choice voting with 73% of the vote. Effectively tripling the number of Americans who have ranked choice voting available to them. So the question I have, and I want to kind of hurry through so that I don't go over time, is the question is, how do we make 2020 even bigger? How do we make it even better? How do we expand this narrative and create this momentum? And I apologize, I had to use a different computer, so some of my slides are a little funky, and this one's especially so. But we need to build a movement, which you guys are doing better than just about any state I've seen in terms of grassroots activity, and a huge accolades to those of you on the ground here who have been part of that, most of them, many in this room. And we have to accelerate the campaigns that are starting to bubble up across the country, like yours. The movement, we believe that we have to get 3.5% of the American public actively involved in democracy reform, because a study showed, that's 11 million Americans, a study by Harvard showed that if you, every political movement from 1900 to 2012 around the world that had at least 3.5% of the public engaged won. And we know that if we can do that, we can win on this issue, and we have to see ourselves as a collective whole. We have to create this sort of light bulb moment that brought you into this issue and into this conference, and then importantly, we have to give people tangible, winnable, concrete things to do. We have to create a funnel and get them to the campaigns like yours in Wisconsin that are focused on not just passing, but also implementing and protecting those laws after they've been passed. And to do that, we have to take what is today a political issue, and I want you to really check yourselves when you guys are going through what's your plan, how you're going to talk about it. You have to constantly be asking yourself, is this going to fire up ordinary, busy people? Or is this a little too cerebral? Because historically, we are too cerebral. We're trying to explain, like, this is how anti-gerrymandering commissions work. And this is the difference between an independent commission and a bipartisan commission. When what we really have to be doing is building a cultural movement that's less about policy and is focused more about how we're going to solve the real world problems of the people we're talking to. And that, I can't overemphasize that enough. And it has to be right-left. It has to be right-left. Everything we do has to be fiercely nonpartisan and has to be conservatives and moderates and independents all sitting down together. We have to set aside differences, as I liked in this slide I found last night. We have to, and that's hard for some of us. I mean, it's hard for me having a gay uncle to sit down with somebody who thinks that, you know, homophobia is, or who's homophobic and thinks that being gay is a terrible thing. But I do it every day, and I say it's okay because we agree on this, and for that we need to set other things aside. And there's a lot of skepticism. Macaulay Culkin's super skeptical. It totally doesn't buy the right-left thing at all. That gets me to point number 2, and I'm going to underscore. This is the country, right? The country is 25% liberal. This is Gallup, 5,000 sample twice a year. It's a good poll. They've been doing it for 25 years. 25% of Americans are liberal, 35% moderate, 35% conservative, 4% other. This is not a liberal country in terms of how people view themselves. And for the last 45, 50 years, since Watergate, the efforts to fix democracy have lived largely here. Meanwhile, most of those people, again, I'm not talking about like hardcore partisan Republicans. The Republican Party, indeed, has been really bad on these issues. But conservative voters and moderate voters are with us on these issues. And another thing that's really important takeaway for you is that when you poll conservatives, the subsection that says it's very important to reduce the influence of blanket elections, if you stop talking about money in politics, and I would argue if you stop talking about competition in politics, and you start talking about corruption in politics, you see a 30-point increase in the percentage of conservative respondents who say it's very important to them. And the fact is, politicians picking voters instead of voters picking politicians is corruption. It is outright corruption. Now, you could argue all day about the semantics of what is the technical definition of corruption. I don't care. It's corruption. It resonates with the people that you need in order to build a winning coalition in Wisconsin, so embrace it. So we have to be nonpartisan because all power opposes us. Wisconsin, because they enjoy an advantage, the Republicans are against gerrymandering reform. But I guarantee you that if the Democrats were in power in Wisconsin and had an advantage with gerrymandering, they would oppose you. I guarantee it. I saw it in 2016. We tried to pass a rather simple public funding ethics law in Washington state, a very blue state, and the Democratic Party and some major unions kneecapped us and killed it and beat us across the state in the ballot measure. Power is opposed. So we have to exploit that there is a real divide between progressives and Democrats, and there's a real divide between conservatives and Republicans. And frankly, there's a divide between independent voters and both parties. So that's why we need to put country over party. Number 2, we have to accelerate the movement and accelerate the campaign. Has anybody heard of Katie Fahey? Yeah. So everybody here, because we're all like hardcore anti-gerrymandering junkies, we know about the Facebook posts. I don't even have to say it. Everybody. But what was interesting is that when Katie did this rather impulsively and got this incredible response and then said, help, okay, this is intense. I got thousands of volunteers. I've never done this before. It was crickets, right, Katie?
Yeah.
Like she went to the established advocacy groups in the state. She went to the Democratic Party, and they're just like, you have no idea what you're doing. You're 28. You're a neophyte. You're over your head. Get out of the way. We got a plan. And they didn't. And so that was part of the rationale for our Represent Us creating what we call the Campaign Accelerator. And what it is, and I'm just going to give you a really quick sense of what we do. This talk is not about Represent Us, but it's helpful for you to know sort of where I come at this, is we realize that there are literally hundreds of campaigns like yours happening all across the country that need help. They need a toolkit to be able to figure out, like, to get this work done. Now we're missing number one. Number one is policy design, legal support, and political help. So, like helping folks figure out how to write a ballot initiative or how to write a law, whether you should hire lobbyists or not, what's your political strategy, who you need on your steering committee, etc. Number two is branding and messaging. Taking all these reams of data that we have in our organization and sharing it so we can say, well, in your state, with your demographic and your targets who you need to persuade, here are the messages that are going to work best for you. And they're probably not what you thought they would be. Three is digital media. Our organization, which has doubled in size in the last year, now has this big digital shop that literally creates free websites for organizations that are popping up around the country and want to get to work. So if we see that impact of policy impact and viability, the intersection, we jump in and create your social media assets, etc. Sometimes we play bad cop like we did for Katie. The Chamber of Commerce in Michigan was suing to get them knocked off the ballot. We followed that. Politics made it difficult for Katie to get out in front of that, but she said, well, if you guys want to go and beat these guys up, for me to stop you. And we did aggressively. We spent a lot of money and we really painted them in a political corner. We get our amazing grassroots volunteers. A little shout out to the Represent Us crew right here. Can we have a little right here? These guys are like, to be honest, I get invited to these kinds of events a lot and I can't go to everything, but when I heard we were gonna have this many Represent Us chapter leaders and activists here, I was like, I gotta go. And a lot of times we bring in visible moderate and conservative support because it's usually missing. Another thing we did, this was about 4 months before the Katie's victory last year. And what we did was we brought all of the people who were the leaders of the most active anti-gerrymandering campaigns across the country, including Michigan, Utah, Colorado, you know the list, Missouri. We brought them together with people from California and Arizona who had passed and implemented similar measures in years past. We brought the biggest funders into the room, and we brought some of the best political experts in the country on these ballot initiative tactics. And we got together for about a day and a half and broke bread and talked about strategy. And it was a really important gathering for a lot of reasons, because we can't do everything online. And of course, we did also create something. I'm guessing the audio is not going to work, but we
Hi, I'm Ed Helms, but you already knew that because it says it right behind me. You've probably heard of gerrymandering. It's when politicians and party bosses draw their own districts so they can laugh behind your back, get reelected, and twirl their cartoonish mustaches. Here we have Colorado District 6. Or is it a 7? Because it sure is weird looking. Politicians literally choose who votes for them. That seems wrong. This November, say no to gerrymandering. Vote yes on amendments Y and Z.
Sure. So what was amazing about this is Jennifer Lawrence and Ed Helms did this for all the gerrymandering states across the country, and they performed so well. It's sort of sad, our obsession with celebrities. 62 times better when we measured across the country. The celebrity videos in terms of virality and reach were 62 times better performers than all other videos, and performed 2.5 times better just generally across all social media content. And importantly, just to be very clear, 99% of what we do as an organization is completely unbranded. That is, it's your stuff. Like, we create it for you, it's your logo on it, we're invisible, that's fine. And it really worked. Not that we deserve credit for Katie's win, but we helped. And I think this can be a real leveraging, a leveraging effect on the movement. 5 times victories on anti-gerrymandering, 23 major victories on democracy reform across the board, a map that was super exciting. And as we look ahead, and yes, for the organizers, I think I'm running out of time, so I'll rush to the end here. We look to the end. This is what the map looks like right now. This is not a guarantee of where we're going to be, but we do see that the purple is where the most active anti-gerrymandering work is. Yes, part of the reason why I'm here is to get Wisconsin purple, and we're going to be talking about, yes, we need to get Wisconsin purple. Over legislative in New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina, there are active anti-gerrymandering efforts underway in all 4 of those states that have promise. Arkansas and Oklahoma, Nebraska, Missouri, North Dakota, Nevada, and Oregon are all maybes for 2020 for anti-gerrymandering ballot measures. And then you've got ranked choice voting. That's really the most promising is Massachusetts, my state, where it looks very likely we're going to be on the ballot next year. We've got a tough slog, though. The numbers are not good. The ballot language is muddy. But we've got Georgia, they're working on it statewide. Great work in Minnesota, as you know, by the ranked choice voting people there. New Mexico, statewide and citywide, and citywide in Utah. And then, of course, we've got automatic voter registration, ethics, ranked choice voting is looking like a likely ballot initiative in Alaska, a very powerful one, and other voter reenfranchisement, automatic voter registration model proposals in other states. So what I want you to do is sort of envision how if we keep building this up, and there was Wisconsin getting darker, like we can get to that point where we have that blue line, that rush of state activity that ultimately leads to a change in federal law. So now I'm going to close out with a couple last thoughts. So we're getting towards the end. I want to urge you all to sort of break old habits. This is point number 3. And what I mean by that is that there's a bunch of elements that I'm seeing in addition to the not being able to see the whole slide. There's a bunch of elements I'm seeing that are both awesome and some are things we have to be responsive to. One is that when we as a national group look across the country, we are struck by how incredibly natural and organic and truly local 99% of these efforts are, and it's awesome. It's really exciting. It's like, you would think with Obama, Holder, and NDRC and all that, that they're planting, I'm sure the opponents of reform think this, that they're planting these campaigns all across the country, and as you know, it's just not true. There's not a single of the 5 campaigns that won last year at the ballot, not a single one was initiated by the Obama Holder people, and frankly, a lot of them, like Katie, were like, peace out, guys, we can't even take your money because it's just going to make it look super partisan and hurt us. Like, so it's a reinforcement that this has to be nonpartisan. So yay to that. Number 2, there is a very wide range of skills and experience. Some campaigns really don't know what they're doing, and some are extremely adept, and we have to sort of just urge everybody to like know what you don't know. Like, it's really important that people have some sort of humility going into these and knowing that there are others in the country that can really help you avoid pitfalls. Number 2, ballot opportunities are limited and vulnerable generally. As you know, the ballot initiative process is under attack in the United States. Legislators are much more routinely repealing them or tweaking them to sort of defang them. And so for you guys, I'm like, guys, don't dismay. This is kind of a good thing for Wisconsin in that you would normally be like, God, I wish we had a ballot process. But frankly, the ballot process is really under siege around the country. And a lot of the energy, including our organization, some of the super funders out there that are writing 7-figure checks, are now looking very aggressively and proactively at legislative lobbying states like Wisconsin. So that's a good trend for you. 2, just overly lefty. I mean, we're seeing it over and over again. That's not a value statement. you know? I mean, my politics are progressive personally, but when we look at how we're going to win, we can't be overly lefty. It's not gonna work. We have to embrace who we need to win a campaign, not who we want to have dinner with. And that's really crucial. We have to enlist conservatives in Wisconsin in a big way. You know that. We start with grassroots conservatives the way you're doing and push our way up. Sometimes that also means hiring a corporate lobbyist who, you know, was working on like something they were doing on fracking that you absolutely loathe, and whatever, that person knows the right people and can actually get this done. And then finally, well, actually I think there might be one more underneath, but under-resourced. We're all under-resourced, but the good news, there are some massive funders coming into this space. John and Laura Arnold spent well over $10 million last year on anti-gerrymandering, and they're spending that kind of money in the next cycle. The Catherine and James Murdoch, James Murdoch was the one who sort of got pushed out of the News Corp empire and decided to try to save democracy. They're likewise putting in millions. I think they've committed $100 million. And there's others. So there is money out there for this kind of work. You just have to make the case for it. And I can't see the last slide, so I'm just going to skip. I don't even know why I was telling you not to be afraid. I found a 15-foot shark off of Cape Cod, so don't be afraid. Okay, I'll leave with this. Democracy is failing, and as long as democracy fails, your issue, the one you thought about at the beginning, is going to continue to fail. We will continue to see a growth in the dysfunction, corruption, and extremism that defines government. And if we do not act smartly, normally to groups like this, I'm like, you gotta get involved. I know I don't have to do that with you. But if you don't rethink your strategies every day and constantly adapt, Represent Us is a totally different strategy and a totally different operation than it was 5 years ago. Because we constantly ran into problems and adapted. And that's why we've been successful. You have to do the same in your day-to-day advocacy. And if you don't do that, everything stays the same. If you do, things can get better. Thank you very much.
I'm going to introduce Erin Grunze. Erin is the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. She's going to be moderating the panel today, and she will introduce the participants.
Thanks, Carlene. Good morning, I'm Erin Grunze. All of a sudden I saw hands go up. I'm like, wait, you have questions, but you're raising your slip. All right. I'm the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. The League will be 100 years old. Okay, no, I'm not that old, but the League will be that old next year. And we know that our mission to empower voters and defend democracy is not something of years gone by, but very much that which needs our attention and collective lift so that people get engaged, get informed, and vote. Democracy demands our activism and advocacy, and the League is working hard for fair maps with our recently launched People-Powered Fair Map campaign that includes all 50 states. Our grassroots, nonpartisan approach to political activism with our nearly 2,500 members and supporters across the state are up for the fight for a fairer, more representative, and more transparent map drawing process. And I know there are a number of League members who are joining here with us today. And that's why our panel of guests are here, and they're going to update us with what's going on with gerrymandering in Wisconsin. I'm pleased to take the stage with these guests and friends in the fight for fair maps. They're going to be telling us about what's going on with gerrymandering in Wisconsin. And first to my left is Jay Heck, Executive Director of Common Cause Wisconsin. And he will tell us about the history of gerrymandering in Wisconsin specifically. And we're not going to go, unless you maybe will go back to the Massachusetts states.
Thank you. Good morning, Wisconsin. It's so great that you're here.
Good morning.
I want to just say a couple things. I've been the director of Common Cause since 1996, so I was asked to talk about the history of gerrymandering. I suspect it's because I've been doing this for so many years. And I just want to tell you, this is just an incredible view that I'm looking at. You know, it's not only do we have people from all over the state, but I'm really delighted. Special shout out to a big contingent from Green Lake County, which is one of the reddest counties in the state. And I think it demonstrates just the grassroots nature of this movement. And the reason that's important is because when I first started talking about this issue 20 years ago, I would come to a place like this, there might be, I don't know, 7 people, and maybe 4 of them would have nodded off by the second paragraph. You know, partisan gerrymandering was such an inside baseball thing to most people, and nobody really knew what it was or had any real connection to it. And I think it's just a reflection of you, the real citizens of this state, that have elevated this issue and made it such a front and center issue. And it is really, I think by any measure, one of the leading political reform issues, not just in Wisconsin, but in the country. And that's fabulous, because as has been said and will be said all day, the only way this happens is with you, the people. We know we can't depend on the United States Supreme Court anymore. Obviously, the legislature, we've had other roadblocks, but ultimately any political reform happens because of the people. And a couple of quick other recognitions. We have what we call electeds today, a couple of them. State Senator Jeff Smith of Eau Claire. Jeff was a stalwart reformer when he was in the Assembly from 2007 to 2011. He was the chair of the Campaign Finance and Elections Committee. And he is in this fight, has been his entire life, and it's terrific that he's here. Also, State Senator Mark Miller has come here all the way from Madison. Again, when Mark was elected to the Assembly in 1998, one of the first things I did was go in and talk to him, and we worked hard to try to get bipartisan campaign finance reform through, and we were successful in some of those endeavors. A lot of it's been undone, most of it in fact, but again, Mark has never, ever backed down from these fights, and he's come all the way up here today. Also a special shout out to former State Representative Penny Bernard Shaver of Appleton. Penny, again, served in the Assembly from 2007 to 2015, 8 years, ran unsuccessfully for the State Senate in 2014. I'm proud to say she's a member of the Common Cause Board. She is indefatigable. I actually said that word. And she is a stalwart on this issue as well. So that, together with all of you, I am very optimistic about not only this day, but where we're going forward. And let me just say very quickly, because I don't have much time, that the history of Wisconsin with regard to gerrymandering is relatively benign prior to 2011. And by that I mean that for the last 5 redistricting processes before 2011, we always had split government. That is to say, we had a governor or 1 house or 2 houses of the legislature of different political parties. And so what that meant was that there was something of a compromise that always had to be achieved, and then the maps would be passed and then sent usually to a federal court. And so that's an important thing to know. That was very different for the first time in 2011, as you know, when one party held all the cards and that party tried to make their party and turn Wisconsin into a one-party state. And that's why we're here today. A couple of other things worth noting about redistricting reform history in Wisconsin. Number one is what's called the early 1960s Baker versus Carr decision, which mandated by the U.S. Supreme Court that one person, one vote, basically congressional districts and by extension state legislative districts had to be the same size. You know, in every redistricting process prior to 1960, we would have congressional districts, usually rural, that were much larger in terms of area, but much smaller in terms of population. And that usually meant that the cities and the bigger areas of population were not represented equally or fairly. when it came to not only the census, the drawing of the legislative maps. That changed in 1962, but the 1960s also was important because we had then as now a Democratic governor, John Reynolds, and a Republican legislature. And what the Republicans did was they tried to ram through their maps. And when Governor Reynolds vetoed them, they then came back again and put through what was called a joint resolution with their maps. And the problem with that, and it's rearing its ugly head again, is that a joint resolution is not subject to gubernatorial veto. And that's very important because that idea has been floated again as something that we may see in the next year or two. Now, the Wisconsin Supreme Court in the early 1960s, 1962, ruled that that's unconstitutional, that the maps that are drawn by the legislature for congressional and legislative districts had to be in the form of legislation, and the governor had every right to participate in that. That was the Wisconsin Supreme Court in 1962. We have a very different animal right now, as you know. So that is, again, something that we have to be very, very wary of going forward. And then finally, the other thing that's important for our discussion today is that in 2000, after the 2000 redistricting process, the maps that had always been decided in the legislature were usually sent to a federal court for fine-tuning, particularly because if you had split government, you'd have something of a compromise, but the federal courts would draw them. The speaker at that time was a guy by the name of Scott Jensen. And what Scott Jensen said in the early 2000s was that it would be good if the Wisconsin Supreme Court were able to adjudicate the maps rather than sending them to a federal court. And as you know, at that time, the Supreme Court said, no, we're not going to get involved. We don't know enough about it. But since the 2000s, there has been an orchestrated effort to stack the Supreme Court in such a way that they would fully be ready to embrace the task of adjudicating whatever maps come out of the legislature and are signed into law or vetoed by the governor. So the state Supreme Court, particularly in view of what the United States Supreme Court did at the end of June this year, and basically washed their hands of being involved in partisan gerrymander, the state Supreme Court is going to loom much larger. So those are the three historical things that we have to keep in mind about what's happened in Wisconsin, which really then takes us to 2011. And of course, it's worth reminding you what happened in 2011. You will recall that 2011, of course, was the year that Scott Walker assumed office. The Republicans gained control of both houses of the legislature, and they pushed through a whole series of measures designed to undermine democracy and fairness in Wisconsin. Act 10, of course, which not only undermined collective bargaining, but also destroyed the funding for the Democratic Party in order to turn that advantage for campaign finance in favor strongly of the Republicans. That was followed in quick order by the imposition of the most restrictive and extreme voter ID law in the country. More restrictive, more extreme than South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, states that had a history of going out of their way to make sure certain segments of the population couldn't vote. And then that was followed by the destruction of campaign finance reform and any public financing that we had in Wisconsin. And we had a significant measure that had passed only in 2009, two years before, 100% public financing for Supreme Court elections. That was the work of Senator Smith and Representative Smith, Senator Miller and Representative Penny Bernard Shaver. That was wiped out. And then the big kahuna. In July of 2011, the Republicans pushed through the single most partisan gerrymander in the country in 2011. And there were many in that year. But Wisconsin chose the most extreme, and they rammed it through. It's worth remembering that they introduced the legislation to do this late on a Friday afternoon, and by the following Wednesday, had rammed it through the Wisconsin legislature. Nobody saw the maps except the individual Republican legislators who were taken across the street to a law office, Michael Best and Friedrich, shown their map only, and had to sign secrecy oaths, promising that they would not say anything about those maps. And it was rammed through, and it has worked like a charm since that time. All you need to do is look at what happened last year in 2018. Not a single seat in the legislature or in Congress changed hands. Oh, there was one. It was a state senate district in northern Wisconsin.
Microphone.
I like that. Back up. It was a state senate district that had been won in a special election. The point is, 53% of Wisconsinites voted for Democrats for the legislature. 36% of the seats are Democratic today. That's partisan gerrymandering at its extreme. Let me, I'm getting the yoke here, let me conclude by saying that we are in a far different place than we were then, because the citizens of this state understand this issue like they never have before. There's great consciousness about what needs to be done. Everybody has seen firsthand the polarization that has resulted from partisan gerrymandering, and people all over from the grassroots are standing up, confronting their legislators. And let me just finish by saying that 2 years ago, when we had introduced the Iowa model legislation, which we'll hear a bit more about, there was one Republican co-sponsor of the legislation. Today there are 5. And what that tells me is people are listening to you. They're listening when you tell them this is important. And they're listening when they see these county resolutions being passed and these referendums. And what that means is that we're going to do this. It's going to happen. It's going to happen because you're here today, and it's going to happen because you care enough about this issue and you're not going to let it go. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. Thanks for helping connect the history with what's going on today. Moving right along, we have with us next Corinda Rainey-Moore, the Community Outreach and Engagement Manager for Kids Forward, to describe the effect of gerrymandered maps on voter suppression and communities of color. Corinda.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Well, I'm honored to be here on behalf of Kids Forward today to talk about gerrymandering and the impact on African Americans or people of color. Realistically, when you think about gerrymandering, it really is about suppressing votes. And not just suppressing votes, but suppressing people's voice. Because you just heard the history of gerrymandering, but what he also didn't say is those redistricting were done behind closed doors. So they were leaving out other people's voice, not even giving people a chance to come to the table to even talk about it. And when you think about the African Americans, for instance, that live in Milwaukee, there was an increase in African Americans in about 23,000 folks. However, the number of people of color in legislation in Wisconsin at the Capitol has decreased. And why is that? Because of gerrymandering, right? Because in this day and time, you would expect to see where communities of colors are growing in Wisconsin, you would expect to see more and not less. And so for me, it is really what they're doing to shut down those voices. For example, the Democrats had 200,000 more votes last year than Republicans in 2012. And yet Republicans secured 60 of the 99 seats. And how does that happen? And you see them redrawing these lines to actually make their voices heard and shutting down other folks' voices. And last year, there was a 3-judge panel that ruled that newly redrawn district discriminated against Democrats and violated their constitutional rights by drowning out their voices at the ballot box. And yet, redistricting is required by law to ensure demographic shifts are actually occurring and represented in Congress. However, what's happening is it's not used for the purpose that it was supposed to be. It's not used to make sure that African Americans and people of color are voting. And another, as we talk about people of color, when you think about the Latino population as well, the Latino population is one of the largest growing people of color in this state. But yet they only have 2 people who look like them represented in their district. So when you think about, oftentimes you hear the phrase, organizations should be reflective of the community to which they serve. Legislators is not any different than that. It should really be reflective of the community in which they serve, should also have that type of representation. So just making sure that we have fair maps and that we're not using these maps inappropriately. There are some things, as you heard this morning, where there are things we can do to make sure that the maps are secure. Like some states actually have a commission that's outside of the legislative that decides what the maps should look like to ensure that there is fair representation. And Wisconsin doesn't have that, right? So there are things that we can do as an agency or as a party to make sure that we are making sure that folks' voices are heard. Another thing we want to talk about is setting criteria. Like why don't we have criteria for setting what those redistricting look like outside of making sure that we hear people's voices at the table, but we also don't have, hello? All right. So why is it that we don't have criteria? We have criteria for everything else, and why not for what those fair maps should look like and how they should be divided up? I think the League of Women Voters and some other organizations are working to empower voters so that they have more say in what the maps look like, but we have a long way to go to get there, and I do believe that we will get there. The other thing that I also wanted to talk about is how do we ensure that we are accelerating some of these voices and making sure that we have fair maps. What are we doing as a group to try to ensure that that's happening? Part of it is getting folks to the polls, right? But I think the other piece of it is we also have to connect the dots for folks. We can't assume that folks know what that means and how that's going to impact them, which means that we have to do some education around that as well with folks. But we need some boots on the ground, and I think that's why all of you are here, to make sure that we have boots on the ground, to make sure that folks are organizing around this issue, but making sure that we're connecting the dots with folks. So it's not just going to be in terms of affecting who's in legislation, but it's also going to affect like Supreme Court's decisions, right? We see who get elected in Supreme Courts, and that doesn't just affect like the recent, it affects years to come down the road for not just those folks, but other folks. So we see impacting on gerrymandering when it comes to, you saw that in 2011, which was mentioned earlier, but you also see it with voting and who gets to vote. And we also know that they are doing a lot right now to suppress voters and to make sure to put way more criteria on voters than needed. And when you think about, and some folks say, well, you know, we need those restrictions, but I ask myself, why is it that they're working so hard to shut down people's voices? Because it really does matter. Your voice, your opinion, and your getting to the polls do matter. So that, to me, is why they're working really hard to shut down those voices, but we need to not allow that to happen. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is that gerrymandering is really should be bipartisan, but we see that it actually oftentimes rule in favor of one political party, and that really is not okay. Because, as I said earlier, it is really shutting down folks' voices and not allowing other folks' voices to be heard. I think, and there was a decision, if we really want to test it, Thornburg versus Gingles in 1986 said it is illegal to dilute the minority residents' voting power. So we already have laws to protect voters, and we need to use those laws, and when we see that they're not being used appropriately, we need to call folks out on that and make sure that that's happening. An example of where we saw gerrymandering really hurt the party is an example would be in Georgia. We saw that with Stacey Abrams, right? And so we know that drawing those lines a certain way does impact people's ability to vote for the person that they want in office, and so we want to make sure that we're not allowing folks to do that. We also need to remind folks that their votes matter, and not just another reminder of who has power, because we all know who is in power right now and how decisions are being made, but we need folks to know that their voices and their vote do matter. Partisan gerrymandering is not illegal, but racial gerrymandering is. So when we think about that, we can't allow that to continue to happen because of the implications that it has on people of color, but not just people of color, because if it affects folks of color, it also affects each and every one of you as well. And so we want to make sure that those are not taken advantage of. So we need to know that redrawing district lines to influence election is not okay. We saw that in several states. We saw that in North Carolina, we saw it in Texas, and we saw it in our own state in Wisconsin. So we need to make sure that that doesn't happen. In Georgia, for example, they redrew the lines by redrew the lines to nine people, nine districts to protect their seats. So protecting their seats is important for them, but what does that mean for the rest of us who are left voiceless? So it means that there's a decrease of the number of folks of color in those districts, which then influence the ability to move people out of office and put people in office who those folks would like to have represent them and have their voices. So for me, we need to continue to work to eliminate that. So that's all I just want to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Corinda, and thanks for helping expand our view and take a look at this issue from a different lens. Now we have Chris Lamar. He is from the Legal Counsel for Redistricting with the Campaign Legal Center. And he'll talk with us about independent redistricting and what it looks like based on already existing models. Chris?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I think I'm in the same boat as Josh because I'm from Florida originally, and so I was telling my parents I was coming to Marshfield, Wisconsin. They were like, "So where is that?" And then the next question was like, "How far away from Milwaukee is that?" Because that's the only city that they know. So again, I'm Chris Lamar. I'm the legal counsel with the Campaign Legal Center. Some of you may know the Campaign Legal Center because we represented the plaintiffs in Gill v. Woodford. I see a couple of the plaintiffs in the crowd. I definitely see a few in the crowd. I don't think I've ever, Campaign Legal Center is about 40 to 50 people. When the Rothschild decision came out, which closed the federal courthouse doors on partisan gerrymandering claims, I don't think I've ever seen 50 people that silent and just sort of shocked in the silence about that decision. But you know, since then, we sort of have turned our attentions obviously to state courts, but also just to policy. My job specifically, I guess really one of my jobs is working on the creation, protection, and implementation of independent redistricting commissions throughout the country. As a lot of folks here know, in 2018, we saw a lot of success with the creation of independent redistricting commissions. We saw them created in Ohio, Utah, Michigan, Missouri, and Colorado. I saw that came up there. And so, since those elections in November 2018, one of the things that we've gotten is phone calls from groups in state and saying, we want an independent redistricting commission also, and we want, I'll have to say, I feel like Michigan's probably the most popular model, the one that folks know about because of the story and everything like that. But we get into the weeds a little bit, and to me, you can't just take an independent redistricting commission from one state and just set it down in another state. That's not how this works. It takes working with the groups in state to learn what the intricacies are of the state, the politics of the state, sort of the culture of the state, to make sure that that independent redistricting commission reflects the values and the norms and the concerns that are within that state. So we've had conversations with folks in Michigan or folks in other states about the Michigan model, and they'll say, the Michigan model is great, let's just do that. And one of the things about the Michigan model is that it requires a lot from the Secretary of State's office, and it requires a really good and really fair and nonpartisan Secretary of State to play a large role in the process. And as soon as we mentioned that, it's like, oh no, we absolutely hate our Secretary of State, or that kind of stuff, where it's just like, oh well, the Michigan model isn't the model that's for you. But I think having those conversations about the way these commissions are set up is very, very important. So sort of turning my attention from that, I know in Wisconsin we've talked a lot about the Iowa model. It's my understanding that the governor included it in his budgetary proposal. That was, of course, immediately taken out by the Republican legislature. But I think that the Iowa model, it could be a great model for Wisconsin, but it's been a great model in Iowa. I think right now Iowa has a Republican governor, it has a Republican legislature, and both the Republican governor and I believe it was the Speaker of the House have both come out and said that they're not changing the Iowa model just because the Republican Party has an advantage in all three groups. And so I think that's just really something to think about in terms of establishing norms because of the norms. The Iowa model was created basically in 1980, and it was basically a result of Baker v. Carr, which got into the one person, one vote, and the legislature was tired of trying to draw these lines to fit in the way that they're supposed to. And so they moved it from the legislature to what is known as the Legislative Services Agency, which is basically the group in the Iowa legislature that's responsible for, normally they draft bill language, and it's a nonpartisan agency under the legislature. And so they'll submit, they're required to draw, they have 3 tries to draw a map. The first try, it goes to, once they draw the map, it then goes to what is known as the Temporary Redistricting Agent. And I think it's TRAC, Temporary Redistricting Advisory Commission, I believe is the word. But it's composed of 5 people. 4 of the people are chosen by the legislative leaders. That's the Republican, the majority and minority leaders in both houses of the state legislature. Those 4 people, then it takes 3 of them to approve a 5th member, and that 5th member is the chair of this temporary commission. Once the Legislative Services Agency creates the first map, the TRAC then takes that map, and they have to have at least 3 public hearings across the state. Once they have these hearings, they talk about, this is the way the lines will look, this is the things that the commission, or the Legislative Services Agency, these are the things that they considered, and so on and so forth. And then once that happens, it goes to the state legislature on an up or down vote. Once it's in the state legislature cannot make any changes to the maps that were drawn by the Legislative Services Agency. What they can do, they can make changes in terms of if they're just, words are spelled wrong or corrections like that, but they can't actually change the way that the lines are drawn. If the state legislature denies approving the map, then it goes back to the LSA, and then they get basically 2 more tries to do that. And at the 3rd time, if it doesn't work, then the state legislature can actually amend the map just the way they can any other bill. Now, I know I can hear the groans as I say that. But the thing that's really important about this is that it goes back to culture. So since 1980, every single map that has been enacted in the state of Iowa has been a map that was drawn exclusively by the Legislative Services Agency. So in 1980, it took 3 tries. I feel like that was the case because it's the first time. In 1990, I believe it took 2 times. In 2000, it took 1 time. And I believe in 2010, it took 2 tries before the map was enacted. But the point is, there's a culture there that the state legislature would try not to, sort of play a role or try to put the thumb on the scale to benefit one party versus another. And I think that's really important when we're talking about ways to draw commissions or to create commissions to draw maps fairly in the state. I think the other important thing is that with public hearings, it requires a lot of input from the public. The legislature, to sort of back up, this process is really, really fast in the state of Iowa. The first map comes out, I think, about like 30 days from the day that they receive the census data to the time they actually have to have the map before the state legislature. And so this process is really fast. And so when it's time for the temporary commission to come out and to have these public hearings throughout the state, I believe they have to have at least 1 hearing in every single congressional district in the state. It's really important for folks to come out and they express like sort of what their thoughts and their concerns are in terms of what they consider to be a community of interest, like whether or not they believe that they should be, the line should be, in their neighborhood or like on another side or wherever. But voicing your concerns is really the important part of any commission. I think one of the things that people, and this kind of goes a little bit into my implementation work, one of the things that has been my concern is that we create these independent redistricting commissions, and then folks say, all right, like now we have fair maps and now we get to go home and work on the next issue. And that's not really how it works. Like, it's really important for folks to play a really forward role, because the problem right now, particularly in Wisconsin, as we heard earlier, is that this stuff has been happening in back rooms and folks haven't been able to even see the maps, let alone put in input on the maps of what their thoughts and opinions are. To give a little quick backstory about like Michigan, and I'm not sure if I'm taking Katie's thunder a little bit, but so public, like in Michigan, citizens have the opportunity to actually play the role of a commissioner, and you apply to become a commissioner in the state of Michigan. On the first day, 3,000 people applied to become.
Past 8,000 now.
So I heard that number and like almost fainted, because that was like one of my main concerns, is that you want people to be able to participate, because that's the most important thing. We have this quote about, fox, we don't want foxes guarding the hen house, and we want voters to be able to choose their politicians, and not the other way around. And that's true. But the only way we get that is by having the public be able to participate. So, thank you.
Thanks, Chris, for tying the legal and making it understandable for us lay people, and that we have a role to play beyond just trying to instill fair map process, but see it through. All right, are we done? No, we're not done. I know. And I go way back. I think this is like the 1,020th time I've seen him speak. But I never grow tired of it, so it's always a good message. So Matthew Rothschild is the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, and he will show us the way forward.
Good try, anyway. It's nice to see everybody. Nice to see so many friends, so many activists who've done this incredible work over the last couple of years to bring this issue front and center. Before I get going, I want to thank Carlene and everybody at the Oregon Area Progressives for the amazing work. As Carlene alluded to, I was the genius who told them maybe it's not such a good idea, no one's going to show up. It's too much trouble. Don't even do it. Shows what I know. It's great. It's a great event right here. And before I chart a path forward, I want to just acknowledge the amazing progress we've made on this issue. There are now 48 counties out of 72. That's 2 out of 3. You don't need to get your calculator out. 2 out of every 3 counties in Wisconsin has passed a county board resolution saying to the legislature in no uncertain terms that the people in their county want to ban gerrymandering. and want to get us nonpartisan independent redistricting once and for all. 8 counties have passed referendums, and this referendum movement is now going town by town. I know up in the town of Newbold, up in Oneida County, they had a referendum in November that passed by overwhelming margins, and I talked to folks in Newbold beforehand. There were about 50 people in the community center, and there's no street address, by the way, to that community center. The only building in Newbold. If you don't stop at the community center, you pass Newbold. And Marquette Law School poll had a poll that came out last January that showed tremendous popular support for this reform. 72% of Wisconsinites want to ban gerrymandering. And the two numbers beneath that are even more impressive to me, 66% of Republicans want to ban gerrymandering. 63% of Republicans and 76% of independents. This is the great education work that we've already done. Now we've got to summon and harness the education and the knowledge of this issue and push it toward successful political reform. So here are some of the steps along the way that we need to take, in my opinion. I'm going to talk first short term from here to November. We need to get more legislators, especially Republican legislators, to sign on the bills. Senator Dave Hansen's bill in the Senate, which is SB 288, and in the Assembly, Robin Vining's bill, AB 303. These are the bills that would give us the Iowa model. And as Jay said, we now have 5 Republican legislators co-sponsoring that. That's 4 more than ever before. Todd Novak in Dodgeville has been with us for a long time, but now we have Travis Crannell and Lauren Oldenburg and Kitchens and Mersal all coming around. We need to get more.
Yes.
And we need to demand a hearing on these bills. You know, the leadership doesn't want to have a hearing. We need to demand a hearing. If they don't give us a hearing, we should have a hearing of our own. We should have a people's hearing in the Capitol. Have a room in the Capitol and have a hearing on these bills. And then we got the Supreme Court race coming up in April, and we've got to get the Supreme Court candidates on record on this issue. Are they for nonpartisan redistricting or not? And if they refuse to even say that because they say, well, it might be an issue comes before the court, we can't do that, it's not right. At least ask them if they'll respect precedent. Because as Jay said, there was that court case in '62 that said the governor should be allowed to exercise his say or her say on any bill that comes forward on redistricting. So that's important. Then we need a big turnout on April 7th. You know, these spring elections, sometimes the turnout isn't so great. Wisconsin, you know, we have a reputation that's well-deserved of having one of the highest turnouts in the country most of the time. We need record turnouts this coming year. And then between the U.S. Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court race and the big November elections, we've got to keep getting more and more counties on board. I'm not satisfied with 48 counties, and there are activists working in almost every other county that hasn't passed these referendums or resolutions yet. I'd like 70 of those counties. You know, maybe we can't get to 72, but I think we can get to 70. And we can have referendums in towns and cities and villages and in counties to show the overwhelming popular support for this issue to ban gerrymandering. So we've got to just increase the heat, increase the attention on these issues. And then in the lead up to November elections, we really have got to get candidates to sign pledge cards. Pledge cards that says they support nonpartisan independent redistricting. Pledge cards that might also say, I'm not going to vote for a rigged map if leadership pushes a rigged map through. And then we need to bird dog those candidates who refuse to say one way or another or say it's not an issue that they care about. And then past the candidates, we've got to get voters to sign pledge cards that I will only vote for a candidate who pledges to ban gerrymandering in Wisconsin. I'm not going to vote for a candidate who's for gerrymandering. And we have them sign pledge cards. I want piles, thousands, tens of thousands of pledge cards and petition signatures on this. And then, of course, massive turnout in November. I think last time it was something like 69%. We should get 80% turnout in Wisconsin. Most countries do that. Most advanced industrial democracies have turnouts much higher than ours. I mean, this is just another indicator to go along with Josh's that shows how ill our democracy is, because our turnout sucks so bad in most elections. So let's have a huge, massive turnout in November. And then you know, I'm gonna get real here, if we don't elect enough candidates in favor of banning gerrymandering in November, here's what's likely to happen. The leadership still in GOP hands. If that's the case, we'll try to rig the maps again. That's what they do. And as Jay said, the leadership may try to ace Governor Evers out of the equation and just ram it through on a joint resolution. It might be challenged in state court, but the state Supreme Court is a rigged court itself. In fact, most of the conservatives on the state Supreme Court are funded by the same people who put Walker in power, put Voss in power, put Fitzgerald in power. You know, they're funded by Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce and some other special interests. You know, their black robe should be embossed with the initials WMC, and that's who paid for those robes. So, you know, they want to rush it into state court. There's a chance to get to federal court. There'll be a race as to where to go. But federal court's going to be tough now after the Roberts decision. Just an aside on the Roberts decision. Chief Justice Roberts said in June in the Maryland and North Carolina cases, one rigged by Democrats, one rigged by Republicans. And Reagan's wrong whether it's Democrats doing the rigging or Republicans. Roberts said, quoting, hyperpartisan gerrymandering, and here's the quote, is incompatible with our democratic principles. So he stipulated that. And on the other hand, and now I'm not quoting, go away, don't ever come back. And he just said the federal courthouse doors are locked. We don't care. Solve it at the state level. So we're going to solve it at the state level. But even with this rigged state Supreme Court, we can pressure the state Supreme Court too. Pat Rogensack, the Chief Justice, has this fantasy that she is an objective jurist. And she is furious that the court has come under criticism from some of its liberal members on the court, and from some people in the press, and some crazy guy at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, that somehow they're corrupt in a renegade court. And so we have great ties. Jay has tremendous ties with editorial writers all across the state. Others of us have other ties in the media. We can get our friends in the media to raise a stink on this. And then we can raise a stink as activists. You know, it's not against the law to picket the state Supreme Court, to picket the building when the state Supreme Court is about to hear a case, or the week before they're going to hear a case. And let's get some pressure on these folks. And so I'm also here to tell you, even if that doesn't work, which is to say the Republicans are in power in 2020 and they ran through the maps, and the maps are validated by the state Supreme Court. It's not the end of the game. I see this thing as a 1 to 5 year battle. You know, we may win in 2020, but it might take till 2022, or it might take till 2024, but we are going to win it. And the way we're going to keep gaining progress and getting closer and closer to victory is keep doing the grassroots organizing that we're doing. Get more and more counties to pass the resolutions, more and more counties to pass the referendums, towns, villages, cities, and counties to pass the referendums by overwhelming margins. And then what I see happening is kind of a merger of issues. Not just our issue to ban gerrymandering, but having a coalition with other folks. Some of it is issue to issue, maybe with legalizing marijuana or medical marijuana. Maybe it's universal background checks. You know, these issues that had 80% support by the people of the state. And then run with all those other issues and people behind those issues on a platform of throw the bums out. A platform of end the corruption, like Josh was saying. A platform of listen to the voters. Here's a radical concept in democracy. Listen to the voters and do what the voters want. And I do think there's tremendous sentiment across the state, across ideological identifications, that we are not being represented adequately or decently. Too many of our politicians view their donors as their constituents and not the citizens of their district. And we can magnify that sentiment and marshal that sentiment and win this battle and some other battles too. You know, Fighting Bob LaFollette said 100 years ago, the cure for our democracy, the cure for the ills of our democracy is more democracy. So let's take the cure. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks to our panelists, and thanks to you who submitted some very fine questions. Let's start with Jay. Give you a hard one. Now, Jay, looks like a couple people would like to know about personal experiences where you've helped a legislator maybe change their mind. How do you make that happen? Share some inside tips.
Faucet torture, flogging. No. What really helps, and what I've seen in my 23 years at Common Cause, is the most effective thing to do, and on this issue and other reform issues, is to get a coterie of people in the state Senate district or state assembly district that are dogged on the issue. That's what happened in Travis Tranel's district. He represents southwestern Wisconsin, Cuba City. That's what happened in Joel Kitchen's district, Door County. That's also what has happened in Vernon County as a result of what you all have done by passing not only a fair maps resolution, but a referendum this last April. That's why Lauren Oldenburg of Vernon County, of Viroqua, is a co-sponsor. It is a coterie of dogged individuals who don't let go of the issue and literally make life miserable for a legislator until they respond. Not often, always favorably, but sometimes yes, because they get that if they don't take a look at the issue, that this is not an issue that's going to go away. So it is the Margaret Mead quote. It is a few determined individuals make all the difference. And I totally misquoted Margaret Mead. You know what I'm saying? So I would just say that that is, by and large, the most important thing. I'll also tell you that persistence, just never, ever, ever give it up.
Thanks. Would any other panelists like to respond to that question?
Two things came to mind for me. One is when the public just expresses its outrage, it sometimes can turn the tide. Remember Robin Voss a couple July 4th weekends ago, on the Friday before the July 4th weekend, said, or tried to shield all the legislators and gag their staffs for life about what happened during the legislative process, wanted to make legislators and their staffs immune from the open records law. They were hammered by editorialists across the state, and they were deluged by emails and phone calls. And they must have almost been hit by tomatoes on that July 4th parade, because by the time they came back on Monday and Tuesday, they shelved it. So sometimes it does make a difference. And sometimes, having decent testimony can make a difference. I was at a panel. There was a bill called the Felony Riot Act last year or the year before. They were going to penalize everybody at a rally. Say there are 300 people at a rally. If one person throws a rock through the window, everyone at the rally could have been arrested and charged with and prosecuted under the Felony Riot Act. And ACLU was there and other folks were testifying that this is guilt by association, and actually they took part of that out. So, you never know. I think some people drew the wrong conclusions from the failure, and it was a horrible failure that gets my blood to boil right now when, during the recall, when we had 110,000 people out there, and they said, well, why bother? If that didn't work, what's ever going to work? But, some of these smaller things do work, too, and protests do work sometimes.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go to Chris, because you have a national perspective point of view here, and I think everyone in this room will agree that we would like to reach out to more young people. Do you have any good ideas on how we can do that?
No.
Next question.
I think so. So for me, it's always by the time that so like in my experience when I'm working with groups, it's always like it's a group of like dedicated individuals who have sort of built a grassroots organization, and they sort of have got the ball rolling on. We want an independent redistricting commission, but we don't necessarily know what that looks like. And a lot of those times, like the people who have the energy and the time to actually put those things together tend to lean older. They tend to be retirees. there could be people in the pro-democracy space within that state, but I would say that the folks who are even within that space, like they tend not to be younger. But I will say, like once we get involved and once funders get involved and more money's involved, when it's time to gather signatures, which is a very physical process, that's when you start seeing younger people come in and the younger people become more involved. But in terms of the early stages, getting younger people more interested initially, I think for me, in terms of my experiences, has been something that's been harder to grasp and figure out.
Thank you. Would any other panelists like to field that one?
Just very briefly, one thing that resonates with younger people, but resonates with everybody that we haven't really mentioned here today, is the cost to taxpayers for partisan gerrymandering. $4 million of your tax money has been utilized to either defend the partisan maps that are utterly indefensible, and that is money that is not used for student loan debt relief. That is money that is not used for funding education. In Iowa, under their system, it costs taxpayers less than $100,000 every 10 years. And that money is primarily to rent the vans to take the people around the state for the required public hearings. There's no cost to taxpayers. That is opposed to $4 million. So that is something, by the way, that resonates with a lot of conservatives, a lot of Republicans, and a lot of young people who are just starting out in life and don't have resources to do very much, let alone even pay off their student loan debt.
I'm going to come to Corinda here. You mentioned boots on the ground and reaching out into communities. I'm curious if you can help us frame a message that resonates with communities of color and individuals. Who should be those messengers making those reaches and delivering the message of how this issue connects to them as voters?
Well, one, I think there's probably not one message that's going to reach everyone, right? But I think tailoring the message to your audience, meaning you have to know your audience and what will resonate with them. So using language that works for them is one way to get folks involved. But I also think that typically what I've seen, it works best when folks who deliver the message are from the same community as the people and who actually look like the people, because they seem to have more trust and automatically just the way it is, they tend to have more trust for folks who look like them right off the bat. But it also means building those relationships, because building those relationships takes time. So you just can't walk in and say, well, let's get started. You got to work and build relationships and bring people to the table who they trust and who they will then go after. But for me, it's really thinking about your audience and what will resonate with them. Like the language is very important. Who delivers the message is very important. And then not just delivering the message, but you have to also tell people what it is you want them to do. Like how can they get involved? What are the different ways to get involved? What resources are available to help them to actually learn about the process and learn how to leverage their voice. So storytelling is, and I would message it that everyone has a story to tell. So it's not just certain people, it's everyone has a story. And then also thinking about how issues impact folks and what issues are important to them, and using those issues as a way to engage them.
Chris?
Yeah, to just piggyback off of that, when we're in drafting the independent commission language phase, one of the things I always say is to make sure that there are communities of color at the table. You know, I've been in conversations with folks like, you know, if the folks who are working on the independent redistricting commission, like quite frankly, looks like this room, I would say we need to find another room, because one of the things that happens is, you know, if I can draft whatever commission I want to draft in my office, and it doesn't really matter, right? Like, it has to have buy-in from folks in the state. And then, one of the concerns that you will see is that no matter if people are in the room when the commission language is being drafted, if we then try to take that language to communities of color or any community that wasn't at that table, there's automatically some skepticism about that commission because they weren't in the room in the first place. And they could have agreed, like they would have made no changes to what the actual commission looks like, but the fact that they weren't consulted with in the very beginning is always a roadblock into sort of getting that initial buy-in from groups that you need to get buy-in from, because we know where the opposition is coming from. It's going to come from the parties that are in power within that state primarily. And if you're fighting that, you have to have all the people who would naturally be on your side by allowing them to be in the room from the very beginning.
I want to be respectful of time. Well, no, I have more. Okay, then I'll keep going. Okay, I want to be respectful of time. Okay, good, very good. Well, there's still a few more good questions here. So I'll open this up to whoever would like to answer this on the panel. One of the counter argument to the fact about how Wisconsin is, that we hear that we aren't actually a gerrymandered state, but that there are concentrations of Democratic voters in urban districts that would make it impossible to develop a map that would be contiguous and compact as our, as we're required to do. People in the audience here would like to know, what's the response to that?
Baloney. Like that's just not true. You can draw maps in a way that even if a district is, let's just say every single minority person lives within the same 3 blocks or whatever it is. Like, you can still draw fair districts in a way that, you don't have to draw these crazy looking maps, and you don't have to draw maps that, you have to pack everybody into like one district or crack everybody into separate districts throughout the state. That's just an excuse it's just a pretext to gerrymander as far as I'm concerned.
And I'm just going to say, I would echo that, but I also would say that if you look at it, Wisconsin is probably one of the worst states for gerrymandering. And why is that?
It is true that there are certain concentrations of certain voters in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Madison, let's be honest about it. But one of the things you have to understand is that prior to 2011, we had fairly competitive maps. And we still had the concentration of Democratic voters in Milwaukee and Madison. So one of the things to consider is the fact that in the 2011 redistricting process, the Republicans divided 48 of 72 counties, that's 2/3 of the counties, strictly for partisan purposes. In Iowa, one of the criteria is keeping counties together to the extent possible, keeping communities together to the extent possible. What that means is that you are not dividing counties for purely political purposes. You're not dividing Monroe County amongst 3 members of the Assembly, which has a tiny population. You're not doing the things that have been done in Wisconsin, where you pack Democrats into fewer districts and you spread Republicans out to gain partisan advantage. So this idea that people congregate according to their party is absolute garbage, because Wisconsin prior to 2011 had a much more competitive landscape. That's not to say there aren't safe districts in Milwaukee or Madison, or safe Republican districts in other parts of the state. It just means that there are more competitive districts because you're not going through these partisan exercises.
And also, if it was just true that there was self-packing in Madison and Milwaukee, why did the Republicans construct 9 separate maps when they were conceiving of their redistricting, of their gerrymandering in 2011? Each map was called aggressive map 1, aggressive map 2, aggressive map 3, up to aggressive map 9. And by aggressive map, they said, with the same number of aggregate votes in Wisconsin, we're going to move a line here and move a line there and get more Republicans elected. And those lines weren't being moved around Madison, Milwaukee. I can assure you, they were splitting, Marshfield apart, they were splitting Sheboygan apart, they were splitting, cracking as many Democratic cities as possible. And, if Democrats had control, envision this. Democrats have control in 2020, and they're gonna take 4 blocks of the Isthmus of Madison and take it straight north into Columbia, halfway into Columbia County. I mean, you could do that too. And that's the kind of stuff that they were doing in 2020.
Can I just say I love all of these Wisconsin references because I have no idea.
Stick around, by the end of today, you'll know. You'll be well versed, yes, yeah. So, gerrymandering happens by both parties, a party in power. But I think as Josh pointed out in his presentation, the movement tends to be a grassroots, relatively left. So the people here would like to know from the panel, how do we reach out to conservatives, evangelicals, those on the right side of the aisle, and what's the best message?
I mean, just in my experience, I think the idea of, I have this thing that I've been working on, like it's my elevator pitch, and I've been doing it in Ubers. So like, I'll just talk to an Uber driver about partisan gerrymandering. And so initially it started off as like, I would get into this spiel and like their eyes glaze over and they just try to hurry me get to the destination. But I think, really what I think though is that just telling people the idea that legislators are drawing their own lines and that's unfair, is everyone understands that. I mean, it's, you think, like I said, like in what other industry or any other place do people get to draw like their own lines? Like I've had lectures in classes, and I would say like, imagine if students got to choose like their grades, with like 51% of the students got to choose the grades for 100% of the class. Like, is that fair? And like people are like, no, that doesn't make any sense. And so I think that's one of the, for me anyways, like one of the ways of just saying, the legislators shouldn't be the ones dictating who their voters are, and that drives it home a lot. I think the other thing Jay brought up earlier is just really getting into costs, like talking about how expensive it is to defend a partisan gerrymander is really good. We, Campaign Legal Center, along with some others, actually just recently won a motion against the state of Wisconsin where they were filing a motion for Campaign Legal Center and others to pay for the costs that Wisconsin incurred because of the defense of the partisan gerrymander, and we won that, and so now you, unfortunately, the taxpayers are on the hook for this extra money, and like, I mean, I think like selling that to people, talking about like how much money it costs to defend these things is another way to bring in like fiscal conservatives, for example.
Former Senator Tim Cullen, who's the chair of Common Cause, likes to always put it this way. What other job in Wisconsin are you guaranteed for 10 years other than a legislator where you are gerrymandered into an utterly safe district and you can misbehave extremely and never fear losing your job because the voters are never going to turn you out? There's almost nobody else in the state that has a job like that, with that kind of job security. So if you're looking for things to resonate, I think it's the tax money that's wasted, it's the guaranteed job, and that it's the utter lack of responsiveness to the vote that the legislature and members of Congress have to their constituents, particularly those people that disagree. I'll just tell you that there was a state senator. Her name is Leah Buchner. She ran for the United States Senate. She said on more than one occasion, I don't have to listen to anybody that disagrees with me because I have an utterly safe district and I'm only going to listen to the people who agree with me. Those are the things that outrage conservatives as well as progressives.
I think this, as you think about gerrymandering, just taking away people's voice, I don't think anyone elected anyone to be in office to not actually be willing to come to the table and have a discussion. I mean, we just saw that Friday where they weren't even willing to come to the table and have a discussion. And where can you do that? No organization is going to run effectively without listening to somebody, to other people, right? And just because you disagree with other people is no excuse to not come to the table to be able to have a conversation.
Usually I would start, I wouldn't get in the weeds on gerrymandering, and I would just try to make a connection with a couple statements that I think almost everybody believes. One, the system's rigged. Just echo that. You know the system's rigged. You know your voice doesn't count. You know people in power are manipulating the system to help themselves. You know, one of the reasons for that is gerrymandering. And then, you know, you might have brought them along, then you can start talking about gerrymandering. The cost of gerrymandering is overwhelmingly persuasive, and then you can talk about other things. I want to hit him with gerrymandering right away.
Not going back to Jay. Some folks out here would like to know if you have any advice on how grassroots organizing and organizers can get some funding.
Well, I've been fundraising, you know, my whole professional life here, so that's 40 years. And you need to, I don't know about approaching the foundation world, but, you know, don't be afraid to ask people for money. I mean, you can't complain about not having money if you're not asking people for money. I ask people for money all the time.
So one of the things I want to let you know is that we did charge a fee for this conference, and it more than covers our expenses. Plus, Sachin Chheda with the Fair Elections Project has raised money on behalf of this, and it bought the water bottles and the toolkit. But we'll have money left over, and we are working on a process that is for that very thing. For the people in this room to have a process by which they can apply for some money to help with the things that you need. And we're going to try to be as equitable as we can with that. It's not in place yet, so I can't give you cash as you walk out the door today. But, yeah, well, never mind. So just know that we're working on that. It's not going to be tens of thousands of dollars, but it will be some money to get groups started in all the CDs and as much as possible across the CDs. Okay?
So there's a couple of us with the Fair Maps Coalition who go around and talk about fair maps around the state. And one thing that I like to do is end our conversations or our presentations with a word of hope. So if each of you could take us out with a word of hope on, you know, any part of it that you would like to leave us with, words that hopefully will inspire or move us into further action, because I know it can be a lift, and sometimes that lift feels very heavy, but many hands make light work, and it's great when we can do this together. So, Jay, that's it.
Well, let me just say, again, I've been with Common Cause for 23 years. I've never been more optimistic about changing things than I am right now today. And that's a testament to you. So I just want to tell you that, and Dale Schultz, former Republican state senator who I often travel around the state with and speak, as well as with Tim Cullen, he said, one thing you should know is you're winning. We are winning, actually. Now, have we achieved the reform yet? No. But if you consider where we were 10 years ago on this issue and where we are today, you all should be very proud of what you've accomplished and the ground that you've covered. The fact that so many of you and so many of the people that in your communities get this issue. Yes, there's a lot of people that don't understand it yet, but we are so much further ahead than we are. Are we going to get Voss and Fitzgerald to pass our maps next year? Likely not, but Governor Evers will veto their maps. That's a positive. And beyond that, this is a fight that's going to only get stronger, a movement that's only going to get bigger. So just take heart, come away from this very optimistic, and that enthusiasm is contagious.
For me, I would just say that I always have hope, just because I don't think that we could continue to do the work without having some hope that things can change and things can get better. And for me, like looking at this room in here, when I came up to Marshfield, this is my first time up in Marshfield, and I had no idea that the room would be this packed. So when I saw how packed this room was, this gave me hope. Right here, I think folks are willing to come together and talk about the issues and not shy away from the issues. I think gives me hope. I also know that things can change and things are changing. We saw that in North Carolina this week with the elections, that things change, right? So for me, everything can change, and our youth gives me hope, because when they get riled up and they want their voices heard, things are happening and things are changing real quick. So for me, it really is about us coming together and figuring out what it is that we want and how we want our state to look. And that gives me hope, because I know that our state can be number one in the country, and that's what I'm working for, and that's what Kids Forward is working for as well.
For me, it's this is gonna sound cliche a little bit, but it's rooms like this, like being in rooms where people, one, know what gerrymandering is, two, are really like are passionate about this issue and kind of understand what's going on. I mean, I feel like, you know, if you would have talked about this issue a decade ago, people wouldn't have understood, and people kind of would have missed out on sort of why this was important and what makes the census year sort of the important year. I think the other thing is just sort of like everything initially starts off as impossible, and at some point it becomes possible, like, and then it becomes inevitable. And so I think working on, thank you. And so like, I just think that, you know, I know it's tougher in Wisconsin compared to other states. I feel, with where Wisconsin is positioned, right? You're right next door to Michigan, and so you see Michigan has this thing, and you really want this thing, and you're not going to get it the same way Michigan got it. But I mean, it's going to be a fight, and I feel like everyone here is dedicated to that fight, and there are people all across the states who are also dedicated to that fight as well. And so for me, as someone sort of based in a national organization, being able to sort of use Wisconsin as a state to say, hey, like, people are meeting in this state, and they don't have a valid initiative, but states that do, like, you have it much easier in another state compared to Wisconsin, and people in Wisconsin are fighting about it, and so, like, you should be fighting for it too, so.
Great Irish poet Seamus Heaney, who died a couple years ago, had this amazing line: once in a lifetime, the tidal wave of justice rises up, and hope and history rhyme. Hope and history are rhyming right now in this movement to ban gerrymandering, and as Corinda pointed out, in these other pro-democracy movements all across this country. We are part of a huge and crucial movement that's going to save our democracy. Thank you.
Up here. So the next speaker you've heard referred to by everybody who's been on the stage so far. Kate Fahey is from Michigan. Oh, it's up there. Sorry. She is the person who led the movement in Michigan to change their state constitution. There are several of us who are here who saw Katie when she was at the Unrigged Summit in Nashville. And I remember her introducing herself, and maybe she's going to say this again and you'll hear it again. I was this 26-year-old woman, and I put something up on Facebook because I was so pissed off about gerrymandering, and I said, hey, I want to do something about this, and if you're interested in doing something too, private message me. And I was overwhelmed. And she'll tell you the rest.
Hello, and guys so much for using your Saturday to try and save democracy. And that is so important to remember. Yes, I heard some claps, so please give yourselves a round of applause for that. Actually, so tomorrow will be the anniversary of me 3 years ago making a Facebook post, not thinking it would end me up in Wisconsin on a Saturday talking about gerrymandering. But my family never really talked about politics when I was growing up. But I always was interested in it in school, and in 4th grade, I remember learning about the American Revolution and how we had this like really beautiful idea. We threw a bunch of tea in the river, and we were like, we're creating our own country. And then as part of that lesson, we then learned about, yeah, and once we had that country, gerrymandering was invented. And I still remember this like weird disconnect. And I raised my hand and said something like, hey, but if we know that gerrymandering is bad, why haven't we done something about it? If it's been around since the 1800s. And my teacher said something like, well, you know, it's just the way it's always been. And as a millennial in particular, I hate that answer. Like, when my dad's like, because I said so, I'm like, absolutely not. And so in Michigan in particular, in 2016, what was really interesting is I'd always cared about local politics. I was really passionate about the drain commissioner race in Kent County. Not a lot of my friends were. But what was cool was for the first time, a lot of my friends and family, who I normally am like, hey, you guys want to talk about gerrymandering? And they're like, no. For the first time, they were actually starting to talk about politics in general. Not gerrymandering, but politics. When I was at a dinner party, I actually overheard my family, which again, we've never even talked about who votes for who, discussing the policy differences between Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, and Hillary Clinton. And I was like, what? You guys know who you're voting for and you've gone on their website to look up policy differences? Like, this is really exciting. And then Michigan behaved really weird in 2016. In the primaries, we ended up voting for Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton, which was not expected. And then in the general election, we ended up voting for Donald Trump compared to Hillary Clinton, which was not expected. And again, I was excited because we had a lot of new people actually involved in politics, but right after those election results, it immediately went into either my person lost, so why did it even matter that I showed up to participate, or my person won, all of you can suck it. And that was really ugly, and I was thinking about going to Thanksgiving dinner, and I didn't want to go. And so this Facebook post is my sneaky way of trying to end up talking about gerrymandering at Thanksgiving instead of who voted for who. Did not think it would lead to me being at the center of amending a state constitution, something I had never even thought about doing. My previous work was actually in the recycling and waste industry, and I worked in business, not in politics at all. I made this Facebook post before going to work, and then suddenly I saw a lot of other people responding, when normally my kind of political rantings just go ignored. And I knew that something was different. And I got excited, and as was mentioned, then a bunch of people started messaging me saying, okay, great, you know, I've cared about this issue for so long, tell me what to do, I can't wait to help end gerrymandering. And that's when I was like, oh no, I must Google how to end gerrymandering. And thankfully, Ballotpedia exists, and it tells you, which was great. But I think from day one, Josh had a slide that said, you know what you didn't know? Yeah, I knew I didn't know how to end gerrymandering. But I wasn't afraid to try. And we just needed to, and I think if I would have known this, I probably wouldn't have done it. We just needed to organize and pick a direction. Are we going to do a sue against the maps? Are we going to do, in our state, we can do a ballot initiative. Are we going to try and work with the legislature? We need to form a ballot question committee, a legal entity, gather a simple 315,654 registered Michigan voter signatures in 180 days. Nobody can sign twice. If you sign a purple pen, the whole petition is thrown out. We had to get those signatures verified, win a lawsuit in the Court of Appeals, then win a lawsuit at the Michigan Supreme Court, which was 5 Republicans to 2 Democrats. Then we had to secure a ballot number with a 100-word summary, raising $10 million plus that we could actually afford advertising so people knew what the heck this was. Get 50 plus 1% of the vote, approximately 2 million people to be like, yeah, Independent Citizen Redistricting Commission. And then prepare to immediately defend this during a lame duck session as soon as it was passed, if it were to pass. While doing the very simple tasks of learning to work with internet strangers that I just met online, and I was really convinced were like Russian spies. Forming an organization of 10,000 volunteers, learning to manage projects, people, progress with an entirely online infrastructure. Take on the political industrial complex, which by that I mean a lot of things say they're nonpartisan, but they're really not. So if you're very genuine and wanting to do things in a nonpartisan way, everybody hates you. Democrats hate you, Republicans hate you, political consultants hate you. It's a very hated person. Taking on the nonprofit industrial complex and having our stakeholders be the people of Michigan, not somebody in a boardroom somewhere else. Having a misinformation and smear campaign ran against not only me personally, who was not running for anything, but also our campaign, raising multi-millions of dollars, and then learning, oh yeah, how to run a political campaign. Basically, it was a piece of cake. A piece of cake gerrymandered into crumbs of endless patience, teamwork, and perseverance. And again, if I would have known maybe everything that this would have taken, who knows if I would have just deleted that Facebook post right away. But now, 3 years later, I can say it's not only the best thing that has ever happened to me, but it has completely restored my faith in the power of people that each of us hold. Yeah. A couple highlights and then just talk in general about why I know that this room of people can make this happen. So we had that 315,654 signatures. When I looked at the total population of the city that I lived in, there were only like less than 200,000 people that even lived in my city, which is the second biggest city in Michigan. And I was like, so I have to talk to all of them, every single one, and then find a bunch more. And me, I had posted it, I was at work, me and my coworker, we did the math, and we're like, okay, if we both quit our jobs, and we work tirelessly and get 3,000 signatures each a day, then we can do this. Okay, great, got it. But the really cool thing is what we ended up actually doing was in 110 days, so 70 days before we needed to, we actually had over 425,000 signatures. We got signatures in all 83 Michigan counties, which had never been done with a ballot proposal. And those signatures were gathered very accurately, and we had just under 4,000 people who had gathered those signatures, which is really, really cool. Especially and I'm really glad Josh is bringing this up too, when we started, everybody told us we were crazy and they want to help us. And they're like, nobody cares about gerrymandering in the state, first of all. Second of all, you have no idea what you're doing because you're a recycling and garbage person, so you can't. And third, we're just letting you know that regular people do not care. They just don't care, so stop thinking they do. And I was like, I'm a regular person, I care, and I've got a bunch of friends online now that do, so why don't we try? And that's what we did. And we did it in a fun, creative way. We all pretty much lived and breathed gerrymandering, or anti-gerrymandering, I should say, and found different ways to reach out to people. It's actually a pumpkin. We created cardboard districts for every single district, so you could dress up as one of those if you want to. Show up to your legislator's office with their district. We could help you guys with that. The one picture with the cows is actually one of my favorite. So we were gathering signatures, and in the same day we had people that posted a picture online of them talking to people at the Detroit Jazz Festival, and then somebody had pulled over on the side of the road to this dairy farmer and was like, hey, sign this petition. He's like, okay, sure. And we grabbed a picture, and it just kind of showed the diversity of Michigan, which I think is pretty similar to Wisconsin, actually, in a lot of ways. It didn't matter where people were at. People across our state cared, and they knew that this was a problem for all of us. We treated our petitions like gold, so these are the petitions actually buckled in. And we tried to make it a fun thing. Everybody loves their I voted selfies now that you get the little sticker. So we did an I signed sticker so that people can feel like, okay, I'm gonna take my selfie with this. But we made it cool and fun to participate in politics. And when you start talking, especially to a lot of my friends or people in my generation about, yeah, politics, it doesn't sound like a fun thing to do. It actually sounds kind of scary. And oh, isn't that the thing where we all scream at each other about how dumb we are? And that's not what this was. This is about being American. This is about participating in the tradition that we have had since founding this country, that we, the people, are actually the ones who have to drive these changes and make these things happen. And not only is that our right, but it is our responsibility. Yeah. Because if we in this room don't do this, who the heck is going to? It is certainly not the politicians that, whether Democrat or Republican, as soon as they get the power to draw their own personal district, they're going to give that up. It's not the special interest groups who have an outweighed disproportionate advantage in getting the things they want passed compared to regular people's ideas and thoughts being passed. It is us. We are the ones who have to play this role, and there's plenty of obstacles that are put in the way for us to be able to do that, but don't think for 1 second that it doesn't matter that you're here, because literally nobody else can do this. And in Michigan, it was the same exact thing. Nobody else. Every single person is impacted by gerrymandering. Doesn't matter where you live in the state. It is an entire map that is passed trying to suppress everybody's voices, Democrat or Republican, to make it so that somebody else's opinion matters more than us as individuals. And so I just want to give you guys a lot of props for even just starting to think about that already. So, why were we able to win across Michigan? And you guys, we've talked about this a lot, but gerrymandering isn't a Democrat or Republican issue, it is an American issue. When politicians manipulate these election maps to pick their voters, they're helping themselves get reelected, and we all lose. And I can't emphasize that enough, because that's exactly why you now know that every other Wisconsinite should care about this. Because we are all losing. Maybe you have a representative even of the party that you like or you prefer, but you can't get them unelected, because once the primary happens, they're already chosen and done. Or when the tables turn and the other side of the aisle can do the gerrymandering, then you are then stuck with 10 years at a time of elections where your vote doesn't count as much as it should. 10 years, one map for 10 years, a decade of elections. And you wonder why people don't want to show up to vote. It is not because they are just lazy or apathetic, it's because they understand, even if they don't know the word gerrymandering, that something is screwed up and people are trying to make it so my voice isn't heard. But the really great thing is we can actually do something about that. So, I wanted to end this with, so why must the people of Wisconsin end gerrymandering? And I know you guys all have your personal reasons, but at least from my perspective, and what I thought about in Michigan was a couple different things. So one, representation, when it comes to the people, all of us being the ones who are driving this, means that our community's concerns are actually being represented in both Madison and Washington, D.C. Our communities, not Democrat thoughts, not Republican thoughts. It's so that when you actually think about what is getting passed, it has something to do with my actual community where I feel the pain. So this is a map of Michigan, and we were talking about that standard, communities of interest. What does that mean? How do we help people be able to use those to draw the lines instead? And in Michigan, we had some quilters. I had a team of like 18 quilters. They were really awesome. And they actually held a contest where they sent out an invitation to each congressional district to say, what is one of your top communities of interest? How would you say, like, what do you think is important? What are the communities that's important to represent in Washington, D.C. and in Lansing if these lines were to be drawn differently? And that's what those squares are across the map. So schools was one of them. Unions, music, Motown, we had that. Car manufacturing, farming. In particular, I didn't include one of the photos, but cherry farming is really, really popular in northern Michigan, and they're consistently drawn in different districts and can't get anyone to pay attention to the types of laws and regulations they actually need. And then birch trees, that are nature too, are some of the examples of these communities. But you all, you know that. You know that your community isn't being represented. This isn't about drawing a line just so a Democrat can win, just so a Republican win. It's drawing a line so that hopefully you can elect somebody who's going to give a crap about your city, about your roads, about your schools, so that they can remember they're elected to focus on that, not some other agenda. Reason number 2, it is our, oh, I have photos on there, okay. It is our job to hold our reps accountable. So I was doing some light reading on the airplane on the way here. Wisconsin Constitution, it looks very neat, by the way. So Article 1, Section 1. All people are born equally free and independent and have certain inherent rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. We are the governed. We have not provided consent. Like, I can't emphasize that enough. From our original Declaration of Independence, the consent of the governed is why our country was founded. We all know this. And it is our role and our responsibility to be able to actually give our consent to approve what is happening. And yet that constitutional right is being taken away when we have gerrymandering. This is not what consent looks like. And also, this isn't what consent looks like. In Michigan, the Flint water crisis was because of a law called the Emergency Manager Law. The people of Michigan actually repealed. We got rid of it. And then our legislature found a loophole, reinstated it, and then 17 months later led to the Flint water crisis, where children and families were poisoned from the water they are drinking. And that is a crisis that would have been avoided if the people of Michigan had not gotten their consent taken away. Just like I know you guys know, especially around the right to work efforts, millions of people in the street screaming, I do not consent to this, I do not want this law, and yet it gets passed anyways. That is the human cost of gerrymandering. And that is the thing we have to talk about when we are talking to our friends and neighbors. Do you ever wonder why there are laws being passed here that don't line up with what most of us agree upon? Why isn't that common sense stuff happening? Well, because it's rigged. Everybody knows that it's rigged, but if you leave out the human part, the real human impact, yes, we're fighting for fair maps, but what we're actually fighting for is jobs and water, and schools and education. Like, that is the real cost. And I know you guys know that, but it's really important to remember that, like, this is what's at stake. And lastly, and this is just a blank slide, nobody else is gonna do it for us. If we don't step up to do this, no one else will. And it is so important that you guys are here today, because if we are successful, it means that millions of Wisconsinites will have a fair and impartial government for decades to come. It means that when 4th graders are learning about our beautiful government and how we're doing this big experiment with people actually being able to govern themselves, that they'll learn about that, yes, there are still places that have gerrymandering, but in Wisconsin, a thoughtful group of citizens stood up and said enough is enough. We are no longer going to turn our heads, we are no longer going to not show up, not make sure our voices are heard, make sure that our representatives will actually pass these things. A thoughtful group of people made sure that happened so that for decades to come, there will be fair maps for everybody. And that is just so important. And only possible because of each of you in this room. In Michigan, it was only possible because we had people day in and day night giving up their weekends, giving up their time, their energy, and their money to fight for a future that was not guaranteed, but a brighter future for every Michigander, regardless of how they voted. And that's what you guys are doing here too. I will work to support you in whatever way I possibly can, but thank you for being in that fight, and thank you so much for inviting me here. But also being willing to literally put your time and your energy into saving our democracy. Because without us being able to do that, without us continuing that tradition, we will lose it. We will lose our country. But this room shows very clearly that we're not going down without a fight. So thank you.
Our final speaker is the Executive Director of the Fair Elections Project and the Chair of the Fair Maps Coalition, and is a big fundraiser for this event today, and we really appreciate that. He made a lot of things possible. Please welcome Sachin Chheda.
Thank you, Carlene. I'm going to start with a story. And it's not my story. It's Wendy Sue's story, and Wendy Sue's sitting right there. We'll leave the awkwardness of that aside for a moment. Wendy Sue is an attorney in Eau Claire, and at the time of the story, of when this moment took place, she was a member of the Eau Claire School Board. And for many years in Eau Claire, which is a very traditional Wisconsin community, city, with suburbs, rural areas, diverse politically, Republicans and Democrats representing the metro area in the legislature, local conservatives and local liberals serving on local school boards, city of Eau Claire, again, the suburbs, a very, very typical place in many ways. And for many years, the school board members, whether they were liberal or conservative or independent, would gather together for breakfast, and they would invite legislators of both parties. And the community, the broader community, was represented by legislators of both communities, of both parties. And they would talk about how the decisions being made at the state level and those policies affected local schools and the kids in local schools. And one thing that has united Wisconsinites for more than 150 years of our state's history is a commitment to public education. The first kindergarten in the country was here. A Republican governor oversaw a commitment to 2/3 state funding for local school districts. It's something that never changed, right? That commitment. And so they're talking about the challenge of, in a post-Act 10 world, post-budget cuts from the Walker administration and his Republican legislative allies, the challenges, and they weren't talking about them in political terms. They weren't saying, you're bad Republicans. They were saying, look, you've made these decisions at the state level. Here's how that's made our lives as teachers, as administrators, as students harder. Here's how our ability to compete, to continue to have the highest ACT scores in the Midwest, to send more kids to college, is affected by the decisions you've made. And for many years, whether one agreed or disagreed with the decisions being made by legislators and policymakers, we had those discussions respectfully. But in this one session, a few years ago, then Representative Kathy Bernier, in the middle of this conversation about education, with her face dropping and just starting to look like she just had eaten something sour, stood up in the middle of the meeting and walked out. Didn't want to hear it anymore. And said, I don't want to listen to this vile political commentary. She's talking about education funding. Told the reporter it was worse than going to the dentist. To talk about education in our local communities. This is an elected official whose responsibility it is and was to manage the priority of schools and local education. When she got up and kind of tore that meeting in half, a meeting that took place quarterly, is that right? For many years. The meeting never happened again. Representative Bernier was challenged, won re-election, ran for the state senate in a gerrymandered district, won election again. And it doesn't matter that as a leader, she said, you know what, I don't need to listen to people on the other side anymore. And that is the Wisconsin that gerrymandering and partisan map breaking has built. It isn't the democracy that we believe in. And when I say we, I don't mean progressives, I mean all Wisconsinites. It isn't the democracy that our founding fathers, both for the United States and for the state of Wisconsin, intended. Katie earlier today quoted from the Wisconsin Constitution, Article 1, the Declaration of Rights. Let me read what that phrase says. It says, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's what she put up on the board. And that concept doesn't just underlie everything about Wisconsin, it underlies everything about the whole idea of the United States. It is the value that was in the Declaration of Independence and why we fought the Revolutionary War. It is the reason that we fought all the fights that came after that. It is the reason we fought the Civil War, right? It is the reason that the suffragettes stood up and said we're going to include more people in this democracy. It's the reason the Civil Rights Movement led to deep reforms in the 1960s, not only to bring the vote to people of color who didn't have it before,
but also to be committed then to the idea of one person, one vote, which is something that we've only had constitutionally because of a series of Supreme Court decisions in the 1960s. When we look at the LGBT rights movement of the last 20 years, it is about inclusion, and that's the history of the United States. So when we talk about gerrymandering and partisan map rigging, that's a deviation from the American creed. We don't usually go backwards. And we believe our votes should count, but when they don't, then we're not a democracy. And in fact, they're starting not to hide that. The small minority of elites who want to rig these maps, now they say, we're a nation of laws, we're a republic, we're not a democracy. They actually say that. These are words that you will see in these discussions. And part of it is they're justifying what they decided to do. And so when we got to the 2010 election, and we got to the 2011 census, and the 2010 census and the 2011 redrawing of maps, they took full control, they being the Republicans in Wisconsin, Democrats in some other states, and they understood how they were undermining democracy, but they thought they could get away with it because the people that they represented didn't understand, right? And we talk about this a lot, that 10 years ago, if you were in a room of citizens and you said, what is gerrymandering? 5% or 10% of the people would raise their hand and actually be able to define it, which is very different than what happens when we talk about this issue today. Now, good folks have been doing this work for a long time. People like Jay Hackett's Common Cause and the great leaders at the League of Women Voters. Lots of people have been doing this work. Editorial boards have known about this issue, right? And really political people have known about this issue. But it isn't something that engaged the public. And there's been a long kind of conventional wisdom in politics that we don't talk about process issues, right? You can talk about healthcare and education and jobs, the environment, right? The right to gun control, you can talk about abortion rights. But if you talk about process issues like campaign finance or gerrymandering or those kinds of things that you can't move people, that's the conventional wisdom that political consultants will tell you. I don't know if you know any political consultants. I'd like to meet some. But, people know that we did know, right? We did know there was corruption. We did know the system was rigged. We've always known that, right? But I don't think that people really understood how the mechanics of that corruption truly work, right? When you come to something like partisan gerrymandering, people don't understand the how. And they didn't understand, until these last few years, how gerrymandering was stealing their votes and making elections not count anymore. Now, let's just review the history for a moment, the political history in Wisconsin. In 2006 and 2008, it was politically good years for Democrats, right? And they took control of the state legislature after the 2008 election. They had control of the governor's office and the state assembly and the state senate. And then, you know, they proposed policies and there was a reaction. And in 2010, under those same maps, the Republicans took full control, right? And they won the governor's office and the senate and the assembly. They happened to do it in a census year, and so then they had full control of that trifecta going into the redrawing in 2011. So they decided to do something that hadn't been done before. They spent a ton of money. It ended up being millions of dollars. They hired consultants and lawyers and technical people. They created a secret map room in a law firm across the street from the Capitol instead of building that legislation in the Capitol. They made their own members sign secrecy agreements before they were allowed to see any of the work that they were doing. And they drew hundreds of different maps, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of maps. And then after they draw these hundreds of maps, and they measured the effect of what those maps would do to the elections in Wisconsin, they picked the most rigged one. Literally the most rigged map of all the maps. We didn't find any of this out at the time. We didn't know this. This wasn't publicly reported in 2011, right? It took tremendous effort from lawyers to find this information out over the course of years. It wasn't until 2016 that we had a full accounting, 5 years later, of all of the corrupt things that they did in this map drawing process. Now, at the same time, they're passing Act 10, they're cutting school budgets, they're, imposing an agenda, which at some basic political level was their right? They won the 2010 election. But what we have in a democracy is to say, okay, we're going to do something about that, right? And if the people don't like what they did, then they're going to throw them out of office. And in 2011 and 2012, we had a series of recall elections, and the Democrats take control of the state Senate in the course of those elections. But they don't do that until after the legislative session is over, right? And Scott Walker retains his seat in his recall election in 2012, basically because I think the people of Wisconsin are fair people. You look back at what happened, they said, you know what, there was a policy disagreement happening here, and we don't recall people for a policy disagreement. It turned out there was a tremendously corrupt thing happening underneath that, right? But it wasn't until 4 years later that all of the data from that corruption became public through the Whitford lawsuit. Now, they've also drawn the maps, right? And they've done, not only have they used the corrupt process, but the result is corrupt. They don't wait for the local municipalities to draw their lines, right? They cut more county lines than have ever been cut before. They don't follow the traditional criteria. And so in 2012, in the fall, we ended up using those rigged legislative maps for Senate and Assembly elections for the first time. Now in 2012, clearly, just like 2008 was a Dem year, a blue wave year, and 2010 was a red wave year, big year for Republicans, it went back, just like Wisconsin has for decades. It's gone back and forth, and 2012 was a big Democratic year. Tammy Baldwin beats Tommy Thompson, the most popular politician in modern Wisconsin history. Barack Obama gets reelected. He gets 7% win in Wisconsin. And the Democrats swing the vote 400,000 plus votes their way in the state assembly. In an aggregate electorate of 2.5 million people, the vote swung 400,000 people, 420,000 people from the Republicans to the Democrats. But the legislature, as you know, I'm telling you things you know, the legislature stays the same. 60 Republicans and 39 Democrats, just like it was before the election. And so we realized, as citizens, people all over the state realized, we're going to have to do something more about this, right? And a group of people, mostly lawyers, and me, I'm just a lawyer on TV, not in real life, starts meeting, the George Watts Tea Room Group. And we start organizing this lawsuit. Bill Whitford joins our group later that year. In 2014, after we've been working for a year as volunteers, we start working with Ruth Greenwood and Nick Stephanopoulos. Ruth would later go to the Campaign Legal Center. There's an election that happens in 2014 that uses these rigged maps for the second time. Now, to be fair, that election goes the Republicans' way. But the seat count in the Assembly doesn't change very much. It changes a little bit. It doesn't change much. It definitely doesn't change as much as the swing in the votes. And so we're starting to see this evidence of the vote go up and down, and the seat allocation just stay completely the same. Wisconsin Voices starts to lead a campaign to get resolutions passed at the counties. And I think 8 resolutions passed in 2013 and 2014 to say, you know what, we have to do something about the way that these maps are rigged. Even though we didn't have all of the evidence public yet. And then in 2015, we filed a lawsuit. And here's what's important about that. We had 12 plaintiffs, we had Peter Earl as lead counsel, we had Ruth and Nick. We launched the Fair Elections Project. And what's important about that is usually when you see a lawsuit filed, it's like, okay, they're going to file a lawsuit, there's a press conference, and then the lawyers are going to go do their thing, and we wait. Well, it used to be in a newspaper, now you wait on your phone, right, for the news. But we made a really clear decision that this is what we wanted to see. We wanted to have grassroots action. We didn't want the litigation to happen on its own. We wanted to make sure that there was a public conversation happening about gerrymandering. That hadn't happened before. And there were a lot of people who were very skeptical. We met with, party leaders, and we met with, media folks, and they're like, nobody cares. Nobody's going to pay attention to this. How are you going to make this thing a thing that people actually talk about? You have to be intentional about it, right? You have to say we're not going to just say, well, you don't have a chance. We're going to have to go out there and do it. And as the coverage of the case increases, public attention increases. We start having town halls. And in 2016, we go to trial. And this evidence comes out, right? About how many hundreds of maps they've drawn and how they took a hammer to the hard drive to try to hide the evidence, right? All the stuff about the secrecy agreements, it all comes out. And then there's another election, the third election under the rigged maps. And this one's a little bit more 50-50, but it really does go kind of in the aggregate more the Democrats' way. And again, the composition of the legislature doesn't change. Now we've had yet another election under the rigged maps. And then later, a month after the election, a few weeks after the election, the trial court comes back and we've won. The evidence that we've put in federal court to say the maps are rigged, it's unconstitutional, it shouldn't be allowed, we win. And it's a huge national story. It's a huge national moment. The New York Times is paying attention. The Washington Post is paying attention. CNN is paying attention. Something fundamental might change because of this case in Wisconsin. And in that case, we proved that we had the most rigged map in the country. We proved that they did it intentionally. We proved that you could draw a map fairly, right? So they've got this talking point that there's no other way to do it. We proved that Democrats live everywhere in Wisconsin, and we proved that Republicans live everywhere in Wisconsin, right? And we actually use science to prove that. We tear down their objections one by one. We leave the opponents with nothing but empty talking points. And so then we're like, hey, we're gonna get this thing done. We know they're gonna appeal and go to the Supreme Court. So we launched the Fair Maps Coalition in the summer of 2017. And we make a decision collectively. No one person saying, here's how we're gonna do this, but an organic decision bubbling up from the grassroots to say, let's go county by county, let's pick up the ball that the Wisconsin Voices started, and let's go get half the counties this year and in the next 6 or 9 months to pass a resolution. That was our goal, half. And then we start asking people, we start doing this research with citizens. Why is the system so screwed up? And something happens that had never happened before. Somebody funds a focus group in Eau Claire with Trump voters. And they say, you think the system is rigged, right? And they say, yep, that's why you voted for Trump, right? Right? Okay. Why is the system rigged? And the first answer that comes back, and this is not activists, this is not political people, these are regular people. The first answer that comes back, gerrymandering. And suddenly, people are like, oh, that organizing that you're doing is actually permeating the consciousness of the people of Wisconsin. In the fall, we go to the Supreme Court. We think the arguments go well, but in 2018 then, the next year, the court punts. They send it back, they say we need more plaintiffs, we need to put the evidence forward a different way. And in my opinion, I'm not a lawyer, so the lawyers can make fun of me for saying this, but I don't think this was a legal decision. I think it was a political decision. It was a political punt. And Justice Kennedy, after having said this was a problem, and that we should have a way to solve the problem, bring me a solution, he lays his pen down and he quits. And his former clerk, Brett Kavanaugh, is appointed by Donald Trump to replace him. And then in the fall, there's a fourth election under the rigged maps, and there's a huge blue wave. It's a clean sweep for the Democrats of all statewide offices. Scott Walker loses the governor's office. The Republicans, though, only lose 1 seat in the state assembly. They still have a supermajority, only 2 votes short of an override in both houses of the legislature. Rigged maps save them again. But now something is happening across the country. Katie Fahey gets the question on the ballot in Michigan. And although the forces of corruption throw everything they can at her, voters, not politicians, wins. They change the map drawing process in Michigan. Voters in Missouri and Colorado and Utah, they pass reforms. More legislatures are looking to make change. So then when the Supreme Court comes back in 2019 with their final punt, nope, we're not going to do anything about this, it's up to the states. They're free to rig maps unless you can stop them, citizens. Citizens across the country say, hey, we're not giving up now, okay, it's up to us, but it's up to us state by state. And I want to be clear, this is what I don't want to say this is what we thought would happen, but we knew it was the likeliest scenario, right? When we filed a lawsuit in 2015, when we started hypothesizing about it in 2013, we weren't like, oh, we're going to go to the Supreme Court and this is all going to be fine, no problem, right? This was, let's take a shot. And it didn't work, and as disappointed as we were, like, the litigation dynamic now has changed because now in states, they're taking these maps to court. And in North Carolina and in Pennsylvania, they've overturned rigged maps. In Virginia, they call it a racial gerrymandering case. Really, it had a partisan component to it. And I know you all saw that Democrats took control of all 3 branches of government in Virginia last week. That happened because they threw out a racial gerrymander at the state court level. They are doing the work that they need to do. Now, the organizing isn't just succeeding in Wisconsin in terms of getting people to be excited about this, right? Josh Silver was here today. And he said to us, they're working in all 50 states, and they know that passing a bill to change the process here is pretty unlikely. We still have to get past Robin Voss and Scott Fitzgerald and Scott Fitzgerald's successor. So why are they here? Why are they investing in the work here? And it's because of this room, and it's because of all of you. There aren't a lot of places across the country where 200 people are spending a Saturday in the middle of the state talking about gerrymandering. We are still leading the way on the grassroots organizing, and we have done something amazing. The power's in our hands. And we didn't just do half the counties. We're at 2/3 of the counties. 48 counties have passed that resolution. Now, I know you've heard the statistics a lot, but I want to make sure you leave here with these because it's so critical. 2/3 of the counties that have passed the resolution voted for Donald Trump. 3/4 of the population of Wisconsin is represented by these resolutions. When the resolutions pass, they're passing with 3/4 of the vote. They're passing 3-1 on average. What this is telling us is that local conservatives are standing with local independents and local moderates and local Democrats and liberals, and so we're all standing together to say this has got to stop. It's got to stop. And it's having this impact now in the legislature, because now we're at 5 Assembly Republicans. Now, people are like, oh, 5 Assembly Republicans. Look, last time it was 1, and then when we introduced the bill, it was 3, and then somebody added their name, and a couple of weeks ago, Representative Mursaw gets on the bill, and it's because he sent a questionnaire, a question of the week, to his constituents in his district, in his gerrymandered red district that voted for Donald Trump, and 77% of the people in his district said, we want nonpartisan redistricting. And that happened because of the organizing that we are doing as a movement. We see the litigation path blocked, so we keep moving. We see the legislative path blocked, and we keep moving. Now we've got those 5 Republican legislators. Now, local Republicans and active political folks actually see the problems in our policymaking system and in our political system, right? They see the problem when all the moderates have been removed from the legislature. And I'm going to say something very clear here. It's a problem that the Democratic moderates are gone, as well as it's a problem that the Republican moderates are gone, right? It makes the governing system break down. It's harder to compromise. I mean, the Republicans have full control of everything, and they still can't pass a budget on time because ideology is trumping progress. And when I talk now to Republican groups, and I'm a pretty liberal Democrat, they see that they can't hold their own legislators accountable. So I met with this group of retail business folks representing convenience stores and hardware stores and small businesses. And they said, you know, when our constituents, our Red Rock Republican Chamber of Commerce types in these small towns across Wisconsin talk to their state legislators, what they hear is, well, if you can get the speaker on board, you can get the speaker on board. There's one guy who has all the power, right? It used to be that a speaker wanted to kind of keep their caucus in check, but that meant they also had to serve their caucus, right? If their caucus came to them and said, we have to move in a certain direction, we're gonna listen to that. And that's not how it works anymore, right? Now all the decisions are made in Madison by the party leadership. And that's bad for everybody. That's not just bad for liberals. That's bad for conservatives. That's bad for business. It's bad for farmers. It's bad for students. It's bad for local folks who want their schools to be funded, even if they're Republicans. And so this is the kind of conversation that we're inspiring all over the state of Wisconsin. So let's review our theory of change. Carlene put it up on the board earlier. We're going to make very specific demands over the next few months and the next couple of years. We want these maps to be drawn in public. We don't want these maps to be rigged. We want them to be drawn fairly. We don't want our taxpayer dollars wasted on lawyers and consultants who are going to rig the maps. And we're going to keep making this demand publicly. We're going to make it impossible for them to rig the maps because the public is now watching and paying attention and understands. And their own supporters don't want the maps to be rigged. 3/4 of Wisconsinites agree. And the political and public pressure we're bringing isn't going to stop. Now, we've got things like yard signs and postcards, petitions, rallies, town halls. We're making ads to run on Facebook and YouTube and Google. We're putting up billboards. We're knocking on doors. We're tabling. We're writing op-eds. And it's not just the people in this room who are doing that work. Each one of us is a coach. And we're getting the players on the field in every community across Wisconsin. And then those players are knocking on more doors and talking to more neighbors. We're on campuses. We're in the small towns, not just the big cities. And if we do our job right over the next few months, this movement is going to be in every town, in every village, in every city, in every county in the state of Wisconsin. It comes down to us. This is our democracy. It isn't owned by the politicians. And whether it's being attacked by the corrupt politicians in DC or the corrupt politicians in Wisconsin, we actually can take our democracy back, and we can take our own communities back. We can reduce the polarization that's tearing families and communities apart. I look back at that first meeting at the Tea Room. 5 people. We just said, what can we do? And we took a case to the Supreme Court. Posting a message on Facebook. 400,000 people signed that petition. It got even more votes than that, 61% of the vote. Everything thrown at them, millions and millions of dollars of the most sophisticated political messaging and organizing that they could throw at these volunteers. And they won, and they changed the world in Michigan. I think about our first coalition meeting, 25 or 30 people in a hot, crowded meeting room, much smaller than this one in Middleton. And now we've got 48 counties on the record, and we have referendums taking place all over the state of Wisconsin, from little towns in Oneida County to all of Milwaukee County is going to go on the record with a vote on April 7th. And I look around this room and I see a brighter future. You know, my parents immigrated from India. Mahatma Gandhi, who we obviously idolized, said, "Be the change we wish to see in the world." And it's not just a meme on Facebook, it's not just a line that people put in their signature on email. It's actually what we're doing. We're doing that right here. So today, with the incredible work of Oregon area, progressives, say it wrong. All the folks on the Plenary Committee, and all the groups that are part of the coalition and who are doing this hard work, this is a new beginning. We are going to change the world.
There's a couple main sections to what I would like to cover in this workshop. And I can always send the things we didn't get to out to y'all afterwards. Sound okay? All right. So really quick question. Why are you guys here for this workshop in particular? Need volunteers to make it work? Awesome. Any other thoughts? You're a leader of a grassroots organization? Great.
Yes.
Finding out what each volunteer is good at and what their passion is so that you can plug them in. Is that, yeah? Awesome. Gonna cover it. Any other thoughts on why you guys are here? And this will also help me make sure that I know what I can kind of breeze past and what I don't need to. So, 10,000 volunteers, great, yes. So I will give you personal email addresses and contact information. No, but yeah, that'll be good. Yeah, right there. How to get people motivated. So important. This work is not easy. There is no guarantee of a success. You have to pave that path, and that's so important. Yeah, another one? You've had what kind of failures? Spectacular. So there's been a lot of attempts to make change in the past that have failed, which is disheartening. And in Michigan, we have the same exact feeling. The powers that exist are strong, and they every single day get paid to find ways to suppress the will of voters. So, easy task of overthrowing them, right? Okay.
Finding ways to unite, and then young people finding ways, modes of action that they actually want to engage in.
Awesome.
These are not meetings.
Yeah, okay, so I'll make sure I hit on that too. Younger people, how do we get them engaged, bring them into the movement? Super interesting thing, out of all of the demographics, or at least this is the polling data for Michigan, Democrat, Republican, Independent, young people under 30, regardless of what political party they were. Gerrymandering, they all agree, is absolute crap and should not exist. So that's a really good starting point, but how do you actually engage them is the better part. But the will is definitely there, the overthrow the system, the I don't have loyalty to a party over what's best for all of us, definitely there. Any other things that people, why you're here, what you're hoping we can accomplish? Dope. Okay, let's get started. As I mentioned before, if there's any way that you can have a blank piece of paper in front of you, or ideally two, I'm going to have two really quick exercises as part of this. They'll just be intro exercises, but I found that like if we don't do these things, then we don't get off on the right foot. All right, and I'm going to go like between both of these things, and it'll be great. So in Michigan, I already had mentioned this, but it started with a Facebook post. Didn't start with a bank account, didn't start with somebody who knew how to write constitutional language, or gather signatures, or run an election. But we were able to gather with lots of other people, achieve monumental success truly coming from the people of our state. And so I have no doubt that you guys can also do that. And I'm hoping that I can take some of the stuff we learned in Michigan. Some of it you probably already know, but I'll help reaffirm what worked for us, and just put that out there. It's not like the only way that you can engage or work with volunteers, but it was really, really effective for us. So one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of people right now, even with politics, have a really strong lack of trust in our government. They have a super strong lack of trust in institutions. It's actually historically the largest amount of distrust since the Civil War. Why that's important is that you, even if you're just a volunteer, are now representing one of those institutions. You are now a group trying to organize to do something. And if you organize in a way that continues to just make people lose that trust, you're not helping anybody. So how can we organize in a way that builds up trust? Which often means, how are we just honest about how hard this is going to be? How are we honest about what we don't know? How are we honest about what really needs to happen? Not, oh yeah, just volunteer to only be 1 hour a week. No, if they're volunteering for a role that's 3 hours a week, talk about that and talk about why it's absolutely critical that happens. And if they have a good counterpoint for why it maybe could look different, be willing to adapt and change to that. But it's just really, really important to keep that in our minds, that there's a lot of people who are really nervous to even try and stick their necks out there to say, yeah, I care about this, and I guess I'll put my energy, my time, my money, my personal relationships on the line to work with you to do this. And so we just always have to be thinking about the other people that we're engaging, as well as ourselves, of course. So today I want to cover 3 main points of how I think you throw together a really successful and gerrymandering volunteer piece. So one is actually, how do you tie your campaign plans to volunteer objectives? Second thing will be, how do you create an actual volunteer structure that connects volunteers with, what was your name now? Sorry. Pat. So as Pat was saying, how do we actually connect people with the skills that they have into a campaign? How do we make it easy? Not everybody will have political experience, not everybody should be somebody who's talking to a legislature, somebody needs to be helping with the website and all the other kinds of things, and we need all kinds of people under this tent. And third, how do you actually go recruit and engage those folks to make sure that they're coming into your campaign structure that now is supporting them and having a meaningful role, and is also tied to campaign objectives, so we don't have meetings just to have meetings. Nobody wants one more meeting with no objective. We have too much time and other wonderful TV shows to be watching, going on a walk, eating some cheese curds, which I love, I just have to say. I know you guys probably get that a lot, but honestly, we're so close to you and we have not nearly this selection. So then the other part of how I want to say this, and the 3 things I would actually ask in your notes section to write down, if I were to leave you with like one slide, it would be this. You have to make a plan, you have to make a structure, and then you can plug people in. If you are trying to plug people in without a plan and without a structure, then you are wasting their time. And your time. And it causes frustration. You can invite people in to create the plan. You can invite people in to create the structure. But without those, if you're just trying to find people, don't do that. Too many other things going on. Don't do that. Personally, in my opinion. All right, so looking back at what worked for voters, not politicians, especially when it comes to all three of those pieces, there's three things that I constantly go back to as these best practices. Potentially another good thing to just keep in mind while you're planning this. Every team and volunteer matters. I know when I was talking earlier, I emphasized this, so I won't do it too much, but whether you live in rural or urban Wisconsin, you matter. And we are going to run a campaign that matters with you being a part of it. We need every single person who wants to be engaged. And that looks differently, because if you constantly talk about the campaign like the only places that matter are certain parts of the state and not the whole state, people will feel that. And they'll feel like they're not supposed to be there. Second is goals within goals. Okay, that's probably a confusing statement. For us, we had to write constitutional language, gather 315,654 registered Michigan voter signatures, and then we had to get the ballot to actually pass. Now, within those really big goals, there were plenty of sub-goals. For example, writing constitutional language. We had to find a lawyer. That was one of those goals. Once we got that lawyer, we celebrated. We're like, we found somebody willing to work cheap enough to work with us. That's great. And if you don't take the time to celebrate those goals, then it can feel like, oh my gosh, this is a 2-year plan, and the only time that we've ever feel like we've accomplished anything is at the very end. That's not true. Even having this summit today is one of those goals within a goal. How do you actually bring people together? This is huge. The fact that this is a reality, and it used to just be a thought, and it used to not be a thought. All those kinds of things are important. And then the third is the defined roles and structure. In any kind of organization that you're buying products from, or that is even a government job, something like that, there are job descriptions. There is a scope of work for those people that then aligns with what they're supposed to be doing. Just because we're not getting paid to be here doesn't mean we don't take that just as seriously. We help people realize, how does you being here impact the greater goal? And your job, as the people who are trying to figure out how the heck do we recruit people, is to make sure every single other person understands why they need to be there and what we need them to do. All right. So, connecting your campaign plan to volunteers' roles. So here's activity number 1. Oops, hold on. Where's my pretty slide? 1 second. So, on your piece of paper, does everybody know what a timeline looks like? If you can draw a line from the top to the bottom. Sure, in the middle sounds good. Where's my, just gonna see what slide number this is. Oh, I have this slide 9. Why did I put it there? Okay. Go back to that. There we go. So I want you to make a campaign objectives timeline. This is going to be a really quick exercise, but when do you need the implemented change to happen? What year does that need to happen? So technically, redistricting happens in 2021, after the census. So for example, if all the work we're trying to do right now, this campaign, we will call it, to end gerrymandering, it has to be wrapped up by 2021, then that should be the very end. And then your other end can be today's date, November 9th, 2019. Yes, I think, right? Saturday. And then I want you to take a second, and first of all, it's okay if you don't know all the answers yet, but just thinking through it as part of the exercise, I think will be helpful. And sometimes, like when I had put, so the step 2 is mark all major milestones that must be reached in order to achieve that goal. So, if you're not sure what those milestones are, when are you going to know what those milestones are? And that can be your first milestone. Hey, in a month, I better know what the milestones are to get from here to there are. That's totally fine with me if you write that down. The important thing is you're writing it down and you know that you have to get an answer to it. If there are big pieces, like we need to get a team of 20 in this district by January 1st. You can just write that down. So try and take your different lines and put, the first thing to do is just put the really big major milestones. So we need our congressmen to sign on and say that they are for ending gerrymandering. Or we need to get statements from all the candidates who are running that seat. So write those first, and then once you have the major milestones, the next step will be making little tabs underneath those to write what are the different tasks and goals related to that. So for me, I just used a couple examples, write constitutional language, so then underneath that, how do we actually write that? Some of the sub-tasks are get a lawyer, hold town halls, create stakeholder working groups, which meant we've got to talk to all the other groups that already exist and also want to end gerrymandering. Then we needed to gather those signatures, so we had to actually develop a structure, we had to create training, and we had to print petitions. So I'm going to give everybody like a couple minutes, probably like 3, to try and do this. And again, even if you're not exactly sure what those major milestones are, take the time to write down, when will you know? When are we going to know what we need to achieve? It is okay if you don't know. When it comes to writing tasks, I know sometimes you're like, I'm not really sure how to get to this thing. And even just writing down, like for me, it might be like, I need to Google how to end gerrymandering. Still a task. Or I want to make sure that I'm talking with the League of Women Voters. I want to, check in with this person. Those kinds of things, though, spelling them out helps make it, this impossible goal, feel achievable. I'll do about 1 more minute.
There's a question. You're starting out with a we. You have an organization. We have a lot of different we's in the room, in the hotel. How do you create one we about that?
So I think the way the conference has been designed in particular is by congressional district. Is that correct? So I would start there. Within our congressional district, what do I think needs to have happen? And this is just a plan right now at this moment of time. Doesn't mean it doesn't change. Doesn't mean you don't then go to the statewide organizers and say like, hey, here's what we think our plan is. That's totally fine. But it's important to know as you're sitting in here thinking about, I need to recruit other people. What are you recruiting them for?
And what's the organization?
Yeah.
Which organization?
Right. And I can't answer that for you, but whichever one, whoever brought you here. Yeah.
I think, although there's many organizations represented here, the purpose of this is to create an organization around this specific issue and mobilizing as members from as many of these other organizations as we can. But there's something here that bothers me, and that is that I don't think there's a single Republican in the room.
Well, and we'll talk about how we recruit them, so not a bad point to bring up. But honestly, if you don't have a Republican member in your section of this district, put that as one of those tools. Do a former elected Republican and do 20 voters who consistently vote Republican. Put that as a goal, because if it's not a goal, you won't do it. If you are not trying to do that, then it doesn't magically happen. And that kind of stuff is okay to put on here, even though it's not as big as writing constitutional language. We had to do that. We had to go and also talk to the Libertarian Party. We had to go and talk with the Green Party, and we have like 2 other parties. And we made sure that we went to their meetings and we invited them. But again, if you don't ever write down that it has to get done, then it doesn't get done. All right, so I'm gonna keep moving on. And this is just a starting point, so again, if you didn't finish it, totally fine. You can use whatever format you want, but the reason I like doing this is I think it's really helpful to root us in the purpose again. And here's 3 reasons why. If you don't personally know where you're going, then why should anybody else follow you? You can't make a compelling case to somebody you meet on the street who, yes, is also passionate about gerrymandering, if you're like, oh yeah, just join a bunch of us who are gonna complain about how we don't like gerrymandering. Like, that's not the right pitch. So when you get your own mindset, then you can communicate more effectively to other people. Which is number 2. You need to also then be able to communicate to volunteers how their job relates to that wider goal. So how many of you guys can think of somebody who isn't in this room, that are out of your friend group, who you think would potentially be interested in helping end gerrymandering? Raise your hand. Okay, so take gerrymandering out of your mind for a second. Let's say we need to, what example do I want to use? Let's say we need to create a website, okay? Do any of you, and by a show of hands, know anyone who knows how to build a website, or yourself personally? Are they the same person you just thought about for who should end gerrymandering? Some yes, some no. The reason why when you take the time to actually spell out the tasks, it actually helps, is now maybe the person you're thinking of, you know for sure loves gerrymandering and they wouldn't volunteer to build your website, but maybe they would. And maybe if you could go to them and say, hey, we need a website, we're all volunteers, it'll be 10 hours, like we're just looking to at least get it launched. I'm thinking it'll be 10 hours of work over the next month. Would you be interested in maybe helping us do that? Those specific asks can help somebody who doesn't picture themselves as an activist or as political, being able to see how they could play a really monumental role in what you're trying to build. And so that's why taking the time to spell out the plan and the different tasks within it can help you start thinking about who else do I know that can maybe help with this. Because even things like a website, I mean, if you know somebody in Michigan who knows how to do a website, maybe they would help if you don't need them to physically be there. And you have to make sure you're okay with that, but at least for us in Michigan, we were. We had people across the country who were helping us do stuff with expertise that we didn't personally have. And the third reason is that people want their time to be used wisely and effectively. And again, once you have your plan, then it helps you be able to think about, okay, how can we really make sure that we're doing everything we need to do in January, in February, in March. All right, moving on. Types of other goals that you can communicate, which gets a little bit to our point about Republicans. What types of people, how many people do we actually think we need? So within those big tasks, if it's like, okay, we think we need to convince our congressperson to agree to pass a bill, for example, how many of their constituents do we think we need in order to make an impact? If you don't know that number, again, it's okay, but how do we get to knowing that number? So then when I'm recruiting other people, I can say, you know, we already have 100 people, but we, through all our research, we really know we need 300 people. So can you help us find 300 more people? Because 300 is objective. It's an actual goal compared to just, we need to convince the congressperson. And when you can make those goals, then people can picture, okay, I think we can be successful. It doesn't sound so crazy that we could end gerrymandering. I just have to find this many more people. For us, it was signatures. So you know, what we did at every town hall that we did is I would say, if we can get 500 people, I don't know if this math is right, if we can get 500 people to gather 17 signatures a week for 6 weeks, we can put this in the Constitution. Normally, you're told that it takes $5 million because you pay people to do that. But we said, I just need 500 people to do 17 signatures a week. And then we got lots of people being like, I guess I could do that. Maybe I could do more, maybe some people did less, but it makes it achievable. All right, so now we have to think about our roles. So now here's your new piece of paper. Second part of the exercise. When you think about, and I'll start here though. When you think about you personally, so you right now, I like saying that we all have superpowers. One of mine is like not being afraid to be on a mic and sound like an idiot. Like not every, like some people are too scared to do that, but if I mess up, I'm like, I'll survive. Another one that I have is being able to like listen to what people are good at, and then I can plug them in and find a place for them. Other people on my team were really good at being lawyers, for example. They were really good at thinking through like, okay, how do we need to write this constitutional language? Some people are really super organized. Some people are really good at getting other people to show up to stuff. Some people are quilters, like I showed that quilt earlier. Any of those kinds of superpowers or things that you're really good at, just think about that right now and think about if you were volunteering for this effort and using your superpower 100% of the time, so we're getting the best use out of you personally, what would you be doing? How could you be using that best? Again, if it's talking to other people, if it's talking to legislators, if it's thinking through strategy, what would that look like? Because I think, unfortunately, because we're building this from scratch, you don't start with just a big group of people in every single congressional district. So we don't get the ability to just be tapping into that superpower at first. But when we recruit other people who have different superpowers than we do, who are good at other things than we are, then we don't have to worry about doing the things we're less good at. They can do those, and we can spend more of our time doing our superpower. Another word for this is delegation. Just organizers tend to be really bad at delegation because we are really good at doing a lot of stuff. And then we just go and we do it because we know it needs to get done. But you can't win if you, and I'm literally talking about you personally, are the only one getting anything done. So what should you be getting done if you could use what you're best at? Because then we need to think about, okay, how do we get other people plugged in? And how do we recruit people with those skills? So again, maybe you're really bad at social media, but you know, hey, one of our goals is we want more young people involved. Young people are not as likely to show up in person for their first meeting. It actually scares me. I'd much rather get in touch with an online community first, be able to see what they're about, have some conversations that way, then maybe I'll show up. But I'm not just gonna show up to a random meeting. I mean, I might because I'm a nerd, but a lot of my friends, that's not how they come. So, again, if you're not good at social media, that's okay. Recruit somebody who is. Maybe for this crowd, maybe you have a niece or a nephew or a kid or a grandchild or something like that who is more good at it, that again, you could say, hey, can you help me for 2 hours a week do that? And it still allows your campaign, your part of the organization to be able to fulfill that role, but you're bringing in other people. Okay. And then, how do people stay informed about what's happening? So actually, kind of to your point of there's a lot of organizations, what's the direction? From the top, the most important thing we can think about is the actual structure that supports people in doing that. And I like to call this the chain of communication. Other people call it chain of command. I actually don't think that's the purpose in a volunteer organization. Because all of us matter that we're in this room, we're all helping create this. This doesn't get created without all of us. But it's still really important to answer these 4 questions, no matter what you're doing. Within your organization. So every volunteer who you're recruiting, and you yourself, so if we need to find these answers, let's find them. Every volunteer should know these 4 things. Who do I get direction from? Who is letting me know how I can best be helping this campaign? I guess it should be canon. Who can I ask questions to? If I have a question and it's not letting me do my work, if I know that I should be talking to my congressional person but I have no idea what to say, who do I personally go to ask? Who do I tell what I'm seeing? If I am seeing oh my gosh, there's this group of Republican activists who are also trying to end gerrymandering, but I'm not the boss, so I don't know what to do with that. We don't want people feeling that way. We need them to know when you're seeing something that's going on, confusion that's happening, who do you tell so that they hopefully can make sure something happens about it? And then who do I give feedback to? Let's say right now I'm probably speaking too fast. Who do you guys get to tell that I was speaking too fast so this wasn't as helpful? You should be able to answer that question and know so that the organization can continue to grow. I know this is again, I know this is stuff we kind of know, but what helped me in Michigan was when I could think about these questions and when we were building especially a new role or a new department of the campaign, we had to literally spell it out on an organization chart. It was a chart of communication, on who is going to make sure that they are being communicated with, and it should just be one person. Because going back to that delegation point, we had 10,000 volunteers. If I personally, Katie Fahey, was the point of contact for 10,000 people, I would get nothing done besides responding to emails and listening to the really wonderful stories that everybody has, but we would not have one in Michigan. I cannot answer to that many people, which is exactly why, again, we all know this, it makes sense to delegate, but are you making sure you're providing a structure that allows you to do that? In Michigan in particular, for our field campaign, we divided the state, we gerrymandered the state into 14 regions, so that each county, there was a cluster of counties, I think each of them, I can't remember how many counties, it depended on population, had one region, and so I think congressional district, it sounds like, is maybe one of those organizing tools here. And so within that, I created a similar structure within each region, each of those 14 regions. So each region had a field director. Each region had a communications director. Each region had a volunteer engagement, which was a recruiting leader. And then all of those people worked with somebody who was part of our national statewide team, statewide, not national, and I just worked with the state team. So me and the state team made sure that we were on the same page about what was going to happen, and then my field director, for example, would go and have a meeting with her 14 field directors, because we had 14 different campaigns, and then they would have meetings weekly where they would know what their goals are, what are the objectives, they could get feedback, she could give me feedback, what she was hearing from the field, and it allowed us to actually delegate that work. So what I would like to do is just start getting the very top of the structure for, and if it's more helpful to like talk to other people at your table, that's fine. But when you think about, okay, we need to make whatever your goal for that you wrote on your plan earlier is happen, what are the different departments or operational things that you'll need to handle? For example, some of those departments for us, one was field. Who is going to help us make sure we're knocking doors? One was that volunteer engagement. Who is helping recruit other people? One was communications. Who's making sure that our advertisement, or not our advertisements, but our letters to the editor are in every single newspaper that exists within our county or within our congressional district? So we had a communications one. Who is our fundraising captain? This does not happen without money. So who is, that going to be? We also had outreach, which was finding other community partners, people who would they're really good at working and networking with other organizations. We also had like supplies and logistics and whatever, but we were very big by the time we started adding some of those. So even if right now it's just, we really just have a field department and maybe a communications department, that's fine. But write those down, if you'd like. And then as you're doing that, thinking a bit again about you and your role, and is your role fall under one of those departments? I'm not sure if in this room we have a lot of campaign managers. I was like the campaign manager, so I kind of helped everybody else get organized. It's okay if you're not, it's okay if you are. But that's one of the roles, or the department pieces that helps everybody else flow into that. And then the other thing is, for the people that you know who are also connected, and some of you maybe have met them already, maybe you will be meeting them, who might fill one of those top roles? So if you do have a field director, who's the person who can get other people organized really, really well? And who knows how to do, I know there's a bird dogging workshop, I think, like who already knows how to do that and can communicate to other people. Who are those people, and you can start filling those in. What I often do, or when I'm working with organizations, if they're just at this phase, they haven't done this already, then I usually just start with, just do the top layer. Just do the departments, and then find the people who will fill those roles, and let them create the structure underneath that, because they're gonna know how they wanna delegate that work, according to the big plan that we just made. So I don't know if some of you guys are at that place or not. I'm kind of doing like a very comprehensive training. But if you're more advanced than that, and you already kind of have departments, you already have roles, then starting to think about how do people fit underneath that. And I'll go back to the example I had. So there was a Madison field director, for example. And then underneath the field director, and the field director's job is they need to recruit captains who are going to then go talk to other people about this. They're gonna go knock doors trying to get people to sign pledges, in my imaginary example. So then I had, they'll have at least 4 captains underneath them. I just used 2 in this example. So they have 2 captains. The captain's job is to make sure everybody is trained, to make sure that they're recruiting people for their chunk of Madison that they've been assigned, and that they're giving data back to the main campaign. So then underneath that field captain, who reports to them or who gets communicated to by them, I had a data enterer who's actually like typing in all of the surveys that you're getting back. And then I have a petitioner, because we did petitions, so who's actually just getting signatures. Their whole job, if you looked at their volunteer job description, would be, I gather as many signatures as I can, because I love standing outside the grocery store or at rest stops and chatting with folks. And then, again, you have this chain of communication, so everybody knows, okay, the person I know that I can get an answer from is this person. You don't necessarily have to have it in a org chart format, but again, if we don't think now about how are they going to receive that communication, it's just going to hurt us later when everybody has a million questions and they're all trying to go to the top. Example for me, where I was like, oh no, I love every single volunteer, but 10,000 people is like, no sleep, ever. Okay. Does this make sense? Any questions on this? Yeah?
How long did it take for you to put together
Our plan? Yeah. So our plan evolved throughout the entire process, including to like the last day. Like we had contingency plans.
Your first iteration.
Yeah, our first iteration, so I made a Facebook post. I saw that a bunch of people were hopping on board, and I threw them in a group that was called Michiganders for Nonpartisan Redistricting Reform, which is not a marketing recommended name. And a bunch of people were trying to go a billion directions, so I was like, shoot. Like, we cannot be, if there's thousands of us trying to do a billion things, it's not gonna work. So the first thing I personally did is I was like, we have to get committees going. And so I decided what the committees would be based on what I thought was involved in a campaign. Not probably the best way to do it. But I had people sign up for those committees, which is basically their interest area. So it's like, if you want to talk to people about what gerrymandering is, go here. If you have fundraising experience, go here. If you have legal experience, go here. And then and then with that team, we kind of made like the first version of the plan. But literally, so for legal, for example, our policy committee, their first part of that plan was, should we do a constitutional amendment? Should we sue, or should we work with the legislature? And so until they even figured out that answer, we didn't even know we'd have to write constitutional language, all of that. But the other groups, while the policy group was doing that, they were still doing other stuff. So our education group, for example, they were trying to figure out, how do we explain gerrymandering in a nonpartisan way? And that was their first task, was what is like the same way that all of us, what are the talking points for all of us and how we explain this? So really, like, our plan, getting back to what your actual question was, we had like a version of it probably actually within 48 hours, but it developed pretty quickly after that. And then the way I personally did it, but you guys are gonna know what works best for you, is I worked with each of those top leaders to really spell out the details of each of their plans. And what my job was as the campaign manager was to make sure everybody was rowing the same boat. And so whenever we had a new objective, so when it was writing constitutional language, for example, policy committee, our lawyers, they had to make sure we were going to write that language by April for us. And we started in November, so November to April. But my education and outreach, we knew that we wanted to talk to people in the state before we wrote that language. So they were planning town hall events, like education events, and they knew that those had to be done at the very latest by the end of March. Otherwise, any feedback we gathered couldn't be used by the policy team, for example. And then our canvassing team, which knew we'd have to gather signatures, they were working on what is our training going to look like. So all of that was happening at the same time, even though at different points we had to actually be, like, some departments had like a bigger role.
You had interdependency.
We had a lot of interdependency, yeah. So we siloed, but we're interdependent. And that required a ton of communication, though. And I know people often are like, oh my gosh, a meeting weekly sounds really overwhelming. If your leadership team isn't meeting consistently, how the heck does anybody else know what's going on? And have it short. Do a 15-minute meeting, a half an hour meeting, whatever it needs to be. Don't meet just to meet, like I said. But it's one way to make sure people are staying on top of progress and that you're communicating what you need somebody else to do.
Were these department leaders full-time? Were they paid?
So we for a year and a half were all unpaid, including me, who was trying to get my MBA done and working a full-time job. For us, we did a lot on the internet, though, which I know isn't for everybody, but for me, I could work from like 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. every day, and then I could just put it online, so when other people had free time, they could connect to it. And I had a lot of working parents, too, who were a part of this, and so, like, conference calls better be right after, like, before school is out, or right after bedtime. Because if it's during bedtime, I got like called out so many times. But those kinds of things, the more you get to know your team, talking about what works for them, what's important to them, I think can help you with that. I'll take one more question, then I'm gonna move on, and then I'll take more. Yeah.
Well, was it a significant challenge to take care of yourself when you were?
Totally, yeah. The question was it a significant challenge for me personally, were you asking?
Yes.
To take care of myself, yes, 100%, which is why I would say fundraising has to be a part of this at the beginning. Like, because you are gonna have core people who want to put even more time into this, especially like younger people or often more diverse communities. If you really want their engagement, sometimes they literally cannot afford to volunteer. Not all of us are in that position. But the more I could learn to delegate, and we could get on the same page about this plan. That's why I'm taking so much time to talk about the plan part, even though I'm sure the exciting part is like, how do we actually get them to show up? But like, the more we could take time to build that plan and to create other roles for other people to take that responsibility, and the more other people knew they could talk to other people who weren't just me, the better my life became. And the more manageable, and the better the campaign was, because I wasn't letting things slip through the cracks, because I, personally, am like, I hate reading contracts. And when you're a campaign manager, you're signing a contract for getting printing done, and for your lawyer, and whatever, and I would just like procrastinate the heck out of that. And as soon as I found somebody who would like read it for me and give me the like high-level version, we were moving so much faster. And I wish I personally would have realized that earlier, because I was being a little bit of a control freak about it. All right, I'm gonna keep going, and we will take more time for questions. I just wanna make sure we're getting through everything. So again, the biggest part with like defining your structure is that chain of communication. Who can other people go to, and how are we gonna delegate the work? And the other big part of that too, though, is, and how often are we gonna meet, and what are the shared expectations around communication? Shared expectations around communication. Some people naturally are like, you better be sending me an email every day. I wouldn't have been able to do that for everybody, and so I had to talk to some folks who were in a different life position than I was, and just say, let's find something that works for both of us. But those are conversations, the earlier you can have them, the more everybody keeps moving together. We're all in the same boat. All right. Now connecting volunteers with empowering roles. So who are your volunteers? This is like switching again. Who actually are there? Who are the people, who are even the people in this room? What do you know about your fellow volunteers? And what I mean by that is, like, you obviously know that they're here to end gerrymandering, which is very important. But what I found is the more that I could know about people, the more I could do a better job of plugging them into the right role. Some things to consider is how much time do they have? Now, what I found is that some people might start with an initial time commitment, like, I'll give you 2 hours a week, all right? I'm like, okay, got it. But if I could plug them into a meaningful role where they were using skills that they normally would use and that they love doing, their superpower skills, those 2 hours quickly turned into 40. Which wasn't always great for everybody, but it really did work that way, where people could see that their time was being used really well. Then they were like, okay, and I enjoy doing this work, I can give a little bit more time. But make sure you know what that initial time is, so that you're not saying, okay, well, on our timeline, in 2 weeks we need a training created. You said you have done trainings before and you have 1 hour a week. You now are responsible for making this training. You're setting them up to fail. There's no way they can do that in just 2 hours in 1 week. So just making sure you think about that. What general work/life experience have they had? So if you heard me talk before, this is one of my favorite stories on why this particular point is so important, so please just bear with me. There's a woman, Rebecca, and I personally had a goal, like, everybody's gonna have this great role, and I personally will make sure everybody gets a custom fit volunteer job. I'm talking to Rebecca, who online keeps being like, Katie, I really just think I shouldn't be here. I've never done this before. I don't feel like I've done anything in my life that's helpful. And I was like, okay, let's talk on the phone. So call Rebecca, and she's like, hey, yeah, and I'm like, okay, so what do you, and she's like, I don't know, I'm just like a mom. I'm like, first of all, being a mom means you have great time management skills, so, and you're also like, can rally people. I was like, but what else? What else do you do even for fun? And she's like, well, I'm a jazzercise instructor. And I was like, oh no, I cannot think of how we turn that into gerrymandering. And I was like, okay, anything else? Is there anything? And she goes, well, as a hobby, I actually do a lot of wood carving. And I was like, okay, I can't say no again after I just turned down jazzercise. So I was like, okay, wood carving. In Grand Rapids, where I'm from, there's this giant art competition called Art Prize, where like there's just huge pieces of artwork everywhere that like thousands of people come. There's a big prize, and I was like, you know what? I wonder if we could submit something to Art Prize that could raise awareness for our gerrymandering activity. And she's like, okay, let me try. She ends up trying to carve this like 8-foot district that actually like, no matter how she tried to carve it, was not stable enough to stand up on its own. And I was like, okay, we cannot crush little children in the making of this. That'll be very bad for the campaign. So it didn't work out that way, but she was like, but by trying to do that, she had done a bunch of tracing and gotten a lot of like all the dimensions correct. So then we were like, well, how can we use that? And that's where those costumes, which were in that picture earlier, she was the one who figured out, oh, actually we could build 3D costumes for people to wear. And then, oh, actually we could make signs so that when we're out protesting, or not necessarily protesting, but when we're out like at an event, we can draw attention. And so Rebecca actually ends up becoming the leader of my education team, because she is thinking so much about how do we get people to engage with this. And later, a couple months later, we're trying to price out clipboards. We had extra size clipboards beyond legal size because then we were gathering contact information on the end. But with that custom size, even buying in bulk, even buying 6,000 at a time, is still like $7 each, which is a ton of money for 6,000 people. And so we're like, okay, is there a way we could carve these out of wood? And so in our Facebook group, I go, hey guys, well actually I didn't, our field director Jamie goes, hey guys, anybody know how to carve a clipboard out of wood or cut that? And it turns out we had 3 wood carvers, we didn't even know, and they pretty much go, hold my beer, give us a second. They do a conference call on their own and they come back with this plan where they have registered us for a wedding registry at Home Depots and Lowe's. Those are in Wisconsin too, right? Yeah. Big, okay. And Menards we also have. But they had created a wedding registry at all of those in the state for masonite wood and little clips and for the right dimensions that they would need so that people could just go to the Home Depots and Lowe's and purchase the giant sheet of wood so that they, the wood carvers, could meet in a warehouse, which they found a random warehouse to meet in, to cut all the clipboards themselves. We ended up cutting our own clipboards for 10 cents each compared to $7 because we had wood carvers as part of our campaign. If we didn't know we had wood carvers, we probably would never have asked. And the great part is once we started thinking about, okay, we're building our own clipboard, what could we do? We put local maps. So like if you were in the Detroit area, we put the state level district map on the back so that, or if you were in the UP, the Upper Peninsula, we put Upper Peninsula maps on the back of those clipboards so that if you were talking in your community, you were talking about your community. You weren't talking about the whole state of Michigan, you can make it personal. Then we put the rules for collecting them on the front. We had little volunteer buttons that said volunteer that matched the color of the clipboard tape that we put on it. I mean, we thought about clipboards way more than anybody should, and they ended up being the best education tool we've ever developed. All because we had a wood carver. And so that's why I take the time to explain that the more you can understand about people, the more you can actually plug them into those opportunities. And also when you're going back to that plan that you'll be looking at all the time, yes, maybe one of the ways you could solve that problem was a $7 clipboard. But now we're looking at that problem in a different way. Maybe we don't need to spend money to do that, we could actually create it. You know, maybe we don't have to spend money on a PR firm if we have a retired journalist on our team, that kind of stuff. Which communities and connections, I'll kind of combine those 2 bullets they have. So all of us probably are involved in civic life in one way or another. Some people maybe are in a religious community, maybe you are in a bowling league, maybe you just have friends that you go and do bar trivia with. Whatever those are, we each have those communities that care about us and look at us as validators. And all the other people who are volunteering with us also have those communities. And so if we can understand who's connected to who, then we can start thinking more creatively. One example that might be relevant to you guys, maybe you're on a bowling league with the top funder of the Republican congressman you're trying to get signed onto this bill. Well, now that we know we're on the same bowling league, let's have a conversation with their top donor about how important this is and how the people of Wisconsin are being screwed about this, and how, you know, it'd be really interesting to see if somebody could try and win on that in this next year. And so then that person is now talking to that person that they have more influence than the rest of us who aren't maybe donors to that campaign have. And in Michigan, that was part of our lobbying strategy for during lame duck, was getting at donors of elected representatives, and it worked very well. And that's why, again, if you can start making those connections, it might not, at first, you know, maybe you can't see where people can go, but then you can. And another big thing for us to raise more awareness was we got endorsements from other organizations. So we literally had the knitting club of Ypsilanti, who was an endorser of our campaign, the knitting club, which I loved. But what was cool is that was like such a local connection that then spoke to that community. An example is up in the Upper Peninsula. We're trying to figure out what fairs and festivals to go to talk to people, and people were like calling me all the time being like, the tractor festival. We literally have to go to the tractor pull contest festival. And I was like, okay, I don't know what that, I personally have never been to one, like I don't know what that is, but they're like, we promise this is it. We talked to like 2,000 people at this tractor pull conference, place, and there's only 5,000 people that even live in that town. Like that is what was amazing, and so being able to know that people even go to those regularly, that we could use those connections. And then why they are volunteering, I think is just also really important. We had a presenter series, so not everybody should be a presenter, especially if they can't be nonpartisan. I think it's a really important thing to emphasize. But when we started asking people why they were volunteering, it's actually how we found some of our Republicans. I think that was your comment, right? And it turns out that especially some people who had lived where they were the minority in a different state. So I had a gentleman from Maryland, and in Maryland, Democrats are gerrymandering the heck out of Maryland. Illinois is another good example of Democrats doing gerrymandering. And he was so mad because he used to be on the other side of the table. And so it really opened his eyes why he was volunteering with us, was he's like, it's not right no matter who's getting impacted. And now I live in a state where maybe technically it favors who I vote for, but like, this is a principled discussion. And we made him one of our key presenters because he had a better in with different communities than some of us did. And that's why sometimes knowing why somebody is there can really help you learn about them in a different way. Okay, so as you're finding this information, so you can do this through talking to people, obviously, but as you're growing, and especially if you're gonna be trying to manage 100 people, 200 people, 500 people, even 10 people, being able to go back to that information, especially because right now it might not be important, but maybe in 5 months it will be. Thinking about how you store it is actually really important too. So there's volunteer databases, and I would go back to like whoever the main organizing hub is, because they would probably have already made those discussions, but I just wanted to like put it out there that these things exist. We used Nation Builder, there's Volunteer Hub, there's Every Action, there's lots of different ways where you can like store a profile on somebody and then like keep information there. But honestly, a spreadsheet works just as well too. You can't always search it as easily. So in Google, how Google has like Google Gmail, part of their suite option is they have Google Sheets, and they also have Google Forms, which is basically just an online survey. And what's really nice about those forms is as they're filling out that survey, it'll actually auto-populate into a spreadsheet for you. So when we were first starting, that's actually what we did, is a Google, well, first a spreadsheet, but that's another story, but we did a Google form where we asked people those questions. Why are you volunteering? How long? You know, do you have experience in these 5 categories? Anything else we should know about how you think you could be helpful? And then when I was looking at that spreadsheet, when I saw, okay, nobody signed up to lead fundraising, which is a pretty common problem, but I was looking through that list and I actually found a woman who had ran the Michigan Renaissance Festival for 10 years. And I was like, she knows how to fundraise for weird stuff. So I called her, and I was like, do you have fundraising experience? And she was like, yeah, I do. And I was like, could you help us think that through? And she was happy to. But she didn't necessarily think of herself in that role on her own. So that's why having that stuff to reference back to is helpful. Okay, recruiting to win. ABR. So for us, we're doing a lot of canvassing. If canvassing is one of the things you're doing, then it's ABC, which is a lot easier to remember. But always be recruiting. And every single volunteer, every single person who's part of the campaign better have that memorized. Always be recruiting. For example, in the grocery store. Everybody will, well, maybe not everybody, most of you will probably be partaking in Thanksgiving in one way or another. Great recruitment opportunity. How can we talk about politics in a way that isn't talking about politics? It's talking about civics. How can we talk about how, you know, we're all concerned by the corruption and that we could do something together? We literally, that reference to rest stops that I was mentioning earlier, we called up MDOT, which is like the road service folks in Michigan, and we talked to the custodians at the rest stops and figured out which ones have the most traffic. Because in Michigan, Thanksgiving and the day before and day after Thanksgiving are the most heavily trafficked days of the year. So we found the rest stops that were most popular, and then we set up tables at them because technically it's private property, or it's public property that our tax dollars pay for. And so we had little rest stop areas where we would talk to people as they were stopping and going to Thanksgiving dinner. And so many of them were just charmed that we were like volunteers. They're like, why are you doing this right now? And we're like, because democracy is that important. But we reach so many people that way. And so just thinking about, again, those opportunities, election day is a great one too, because those people are all registered to vote. You can technically stand outside of the polls. It's like, in Michigan, it's 100 feet away. I'm not sure the rules here. But you have a target audience that's kind of like filtering into the libraries or wherever people vote, and you can maybe just mention something and you reach a lot more people. Okay. For us, when we were writing the language, we did 33 town halls in 33 days. Thinking about, yes, and we talked to over 5,000 people, and all of them filled out a survey that helped us write our constitutional language. We were very serious that it's not what Katie Fahey thinks is the best solution, it is what the people of Michigan think is the best solution. So, you don't need to write constitutional language, But within your geographic area that you're responsible for, so I'm going to keep going with the congressional districts example, within your congressional district, there's probably lots of different types of communities. What are kind of the main parts of that community? What are the rural cities? What are the urban cities? What cities like maybe have a big manufacturing presence or is known for something else? And how are you personally, as the person who's trying to recruit people, going to make sure that you're engaging people across that district? And one good way to do that is literally by holding events to let people know, like, we're doing something about gerrymandering, don't know what it is, come, be a part of the movement, whatever those are. Talking to other people who might know people in those locations, but libraries are a great place that are usually free to hold events. We one time did a meeting in a McDonald's because it was the only place that had Wi-Fi within like a 30-mile radius, or probably larger than that. It was a fun meeting. But thinking about those kinds of things and being able to use different events, because then too, if you're talking to somebody at a rest stop or at Thanksgiving, you're like, actually we have, an event that's gonna be much closer to you where you can come and find out more. There's a lot of people, like I said, not necessarily millennials, there's a lot of other people who really like that community feeling, and if something's important going on in their community, then they'll make sure that they go. Getting the time signal, so I'll hurry. And part of ours when we were doing those surveys, we just asked people their own opinions too. It helped us be able to talk to those communities better. So even more unpopular than current lawmakers being in charge of redistricting was lobbyists. People were very opposed to lobbyists being a part of the process. But what we would also find out are the different values that people in different parts of the state really considered, what their top concerns were. So Flint is a really easy one. If you're not talking to me about how this is improving the water system, then I don't have time. I do not have time to talk about gerrymandering. I do not have clean water. But when we can make the tie of, actually, how do we prevent the next Flint, then people are like, sign me up. What do I need to do? So those kinds of things can help. So this is a map of Michigan, but every part of Wisconsin is gerrymandered, and I just think that's really important to emphasize again, much like my clipboard story. If you show people their local map, don't make assumptions that just because they're a Democrat or Republican, they might think one way or another about it, because if you put the cities on top of it, for example, in rural Michigan, there's a city called Big Bay. Big Bay only has one road that goes to another city called Marquette. Their congressional district is not connected with Marquette. Everybody who lived in Big Bay was like, why the heck would we be with all the other part of the state that we don't relate to, we literally can't even drive to? Clearly this is gerrymandered. Clearly somebody's doing this to try and separate us. It makes people really mad and it makes it personal. Another way is when you're thinking about your individual district, so there's 3 House districts, District 73, 76, 75 in Michigan, that is, it goes through all 3, it happens to be where I live, and on one street, 6 houses, 3 different districts. So and I'm not in shape, as you can see, I ran them. I ran all 6 houses, and it took me 46 seconds. But we filmed that, and that video actually went viral after showing that, and it made it really personal. We actually knocked on the doors of all 6 of those houses and got their personal stories, too, about how they get way too many political advertisements. They always get candidates who aren't actually running, knocking on their door, all that kind of stuff. And so thinking about your individual geographic area, what are the things you can do to raise awareness? Because once we have that video, more people see that video. As part of the video, we put, the only way this can happen is with people being involved or whatever. Do the volunteer link, then you get more people signing up to volunteer. Other thing I will say as a side note is that when you're getting volunteers, the sooner you can do a personal point of contact, if you can call them and talk to them and then plug them in, if you can get them to a meeting, whatever it is, the better. People might get really excited and enthusiastic, but if you're waiting 2 months to get back to them, they might not be as engaged. So earned media, okay, 2 minutes, all right, sorry guys. All right, and I can email whatever we don't get to. So earned media basically means free press, local newspaper doing a story. For us, we got MTV. MTV, music television, apparently loves ending gerrymandering, and so we had to do something on there. Arnold Schwarzenegger also loves ending gerrymandering, so he came into town and helped us get a bunch of news reporters. But there's the video, how long does it take to jog through 3 districts? 46 seconds. But all of that was super, super important for getting people to hear about what we were doing. The other thing is it helped motivate volunteers who were working on this. A lot of us who especially started volunteering with this, we listen to political news, we pay attention to what's going on in our state. So to then see the thing we are working on in the news is pretty darn exciting. And And to even for those local representatives to get in the newspaper, I mean, that makes you know that you're making progress. So I can't emphasize that enough, and I just had a quick little checklist for earned media, making sure you're highlighting that you're a volunteer. People love knowing that you aren't paid to be there, honestly. They like knowing, why are you spending your free time to do this? Say exactly how someone can sign up. So even if I was on the radio and technically they didn't tell me I could do this, I would often be like, so if anybody's interested, you can go to votersnotpoliticians.com, because the only way that this is happening is because thousands of citizens across our state are stepping up to do something about it. So then somebody listening to that is like, I don't want to be one of those people. Say why you need volunteers. We have to print petitions, newspaper person. Did you know it costs $40,000 to just print them? I don't have $40,000. That's a quote the newspaper loves printing, and then lets people know we need $40,000. And then we did things like a text marketing campaign, where you could text, our new organization is The People, so The People to 555-888, and it automatically sends people volunteer information. So there's also places you can post volunteer opportunities. Ideal List is one of those, Taproot Foundation. And then even just other partners, so Legal Women Voters, Common Cause, can we do an event together if we're trying to talk to this legislator, who should play what role? Don't underutilize those, and having a specific ask is often the best way to try and work with folks. Is democracy dead? Not yet. I'm skipping kind of ahead. Okay, I'll leave that up there so you guys can get connected with us if you need to. Basically, and I can send the rest of this, but we're at 2 minutes, putting yourselves out there and then having the right way to connect volunteers is the best way to actually recruit them and engage them. And then letting them know your real goals related to that. So let's say you get 2 more people, let's say you get 5 people because you held an event to talk about gerrymandering. So if those 5 people know that we can't do this without 20 more people, and then you're talking about when you need those 20 people, we really need those 20 people by the end of the month because of X, Y, Z. Because then we will stay on track for our goals. That kind of stuff, maybe it seems too in the weeds, maybe it seems like too many details, but to so many people it helps them understand why. Why am I getting uncomfortable and having to talk to my friends about gerrymandering? If I'm doing it because we can't win otherwise, okay. If I'm doing it because literally I know that Katie doesn't have a spare $40,000 hanging around and I know it's going to print these, okay, I can give you $5 more. I can ask 10 of my friends to donate $5. All those kinds of things, but you have to really help people understand, because again, going back to that point I made at the beginning, trust in institutions and trust between people is so low right now. And it's not for unfounded reasons. There are plenty of people who say one thing and do another. We are not those people, so we don't, but we still understand that other people have to experience that all the time. So I think we're done, but I'll take a question or two really quick until they kick me off the stage. And thanks for listening. I know that was so much information. I'm happy, like I said, to help later too. Yeah? Did I get my degree? My MBA now, it's still on pause. Technically, I've sunk a lot of money into it. Any other questions? Yeah?
You creative plans and things like that, are they available for reuse?
Yeah. So the people, what I'm trying to do with the people is there's so many barriers to starting to organize. How do you make a campaign plan? I didn't know. So creating that from scratch is really frustrating, and we're trying to take as much as that as we had and pay it forward and give it to other folks to utilize. We're in startup mode, so we only have so many things already created, but everything we have created I'm happy to share. Our website has some of it, but you usually have to sign up to be a volunteer, but if you can shoot. At thepeople.org, yeah. So my email is katie@thepeople.org, but we're also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Website is thepeople.org. Yeah.
Or an alternative I wanted to mention was
Yeah.
that the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign's website has a toolkit for organizing
Good.
to do this.
What was that, the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign?
Right. And
Has a toolkit online to do that, so everybody should write that down too.
And there's a case study of how the counties of La Crosse and Vernon County did this last year
Perfect.
in that toolkit.
So there's a case study in that toolkit of how 2 counties got the resolution passed, I'm guessing? Is that what the toolkit is?
Yes.
Yeah, got that resolution passed. Why reinvent the plan if there's already a plan? And I'm all about that, so make sure that you're looking at that. Yeah?
How did you publicize the town halls?
Yeah, how do we publicize the town halls? Great question. So we put it, so when we were doing it, it was to write constitutional language. I would think about, and I would make sure that whoever is at the top, like, approves this, I just wanna say. But putting some kind of tangible action to why people should show up is the best way to do something. Having a town hall on gerrymandering is fine, but without the action part, why am I showing up unless I'm a person who's already interested? So if you could say, for example, we are going to, we're doing a campaign to end gerrymandering, or we're trying to pass a resolution in the county about gerrymandering and we want your input. Something like that. When we sent that to local media, we got on the radio station, we got newspapers to interview us because it was an action. It was a, we're planning to do this concrete action, and it wasn't just a come learn about this. Because there's lots of come learn about this, and sometimes you'll get newspapers to still cover that. But what we found was more effective, how we got on the radio, especially Marquette, is we're writing a constitutional amendment, and we want to make sure the people of Marquette, Michigan, have their input heard in this. So we're trying to pass a county resolution to end gerrymandering. We want to make sure that the people of this county have input on whatever, know what it is before we do that. Or we're trying to find people to do that. But if there's any way to do that and then doing media with it. Other thing is there are lots of online opportunities, lots of news channels or stations have community calendars. There's lots of online groups, Facebook groups, whatever, where they're already doing organizing. So oftentimes you want to talk to whoever's the head of those, but like an Indivisible, for example, trying to say like, hey, we have this going on, could you let your people know, or is there somebody that we can work with for where you guys hold events, stuff like that. But if you don't tell people about it, they don't just magically come. And the best way to get people to show up is through people personally inviting them and saying you have to come. Like, hey, we are doing something, it's really exciting. There are actually hundreds of people across Wisconsin really with a plan to end gerrymandering, and you have to be at this meeting because we need more people. Those kinds of personal one-on-one asks are like the best way for people to show up. But again, the being honest about that is at that meeting, they know what they can do to help end gerrymandering. So that they're not going to that meeting being like, you really said I should be here. And then they get there and it's like, yeah, so we're going to do the work. Thanks for coming. Bye. Don't do that. People want to help. They just don't know how. So many of us every single day, I don't know if anybody else feels this anyways, watch the news and I'm like, what? Another thing? I want to do something about it, but what can I do? And you all have a plan for something people can do. So know that that's part of your superpower too. You know that plan and you can help people get connected into it. We're done?
We're done.
Sorry, guys.